Chapter 13 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice LEBLANC. Chapter 13. The Seven Scoundrels. "Will you see this gentleman, ma'am?" Dolores Kesselbach took the card from the footman and read: "André Beauny. No," she said, "I don't know him." "The gentleman seems very anxious to see you, ma'am. He says that you are expecting him." "Oh?" "Possibly. Yes, bring him here." Since the events which had upset her life and pursued her with relentless animosity, Dolores, after staying at the Hôtel Bristol, had taken up her abode in a quiet house in the Rue des Vignes, down at Passy. A pretty garden lay at the back of the house, and was surrounded by other leafy gardens. On days when attacks more painful than usual did not keep her from morning till night behind the closed shutters of her bedroom, she made her servants carry her under the trees, where she lay stretched at full length, a victim to melancholy, incapable of fighting against her hard fate. Footsteps sounded on the gravel path and the footman returned, followed by a young man, smart in appearance and very simply dressed, in the rather out-of-date fashion adopted by some of our painters, with a turned-down collar and a flowing necktie of white spots on a blue ground. The footman withdrew. "Your name is André Beauny, I believe," said Dolores. "Yes, madame." "I have not the honour." "I beg your pardon, madame. Knowing that I was a friend of Madame Ernemont, Geneviève's grandmother, you wrote to her, at Garches, saying that you wished to speak to me. I have come." Dolores rose in her seat, very excitedly. "Oh, you are...." "Yes." She stammered: "Really? Is it you? I don't recognize you." "You don't recognize Prince Paul Sernine?" "No. Everything is different: the forehead, the eyes. And that is not how the newspapers represented the prisoner at the Santé," he said, with a smile. "And yet it is I, really." A long silence followed, during which they remained embarrassed and ill at ease. At last he asked: "May I know the reason? Did not Geneviève tell you?" "I have not seen her. But her grandmother seemed to think that you required my services." "That's right, that's right." "And in what way? I am so pleased." She hesitated a second and then whispered: "I'm afraid." "Afraid?" he cried. "Yes," she said, speaking in a low voice, "I am afraid of everything, afraid of to day and of to morrow and of the day after, afraid of life. I have suffered so much and I can bear no more." He looked at her with great pity in his eyes. The vague feeling that had always drawn him to this woman took a more precise character now that she was asking for his protection. He felt an eager need to devote himself to her, wholly, without hope of reward. She continued: "I am alone now, quite alone, with servants whom I have picked up on chance, and I am afraid. I feel that people are moving about me." "But with what object?" "I do not know. But the enemy is hovering around and coming closer." "Have you seen him? Have you noticed anything?" "Yes. The other day two men passed several times in the street and stopped in front of the house." "Can you describe them?" "I saw one of them better than the other. He was tall and powerful, clean shaven, and wore a little black cloth jacket, cut quite short." "A waiter at a café, perhaps?" "Yes, a head waiter. I had him followed by one of my servants. He went down the Rue de la Pompe and entered a common looking house. The ground floor is occupied by a wine shop. It is the first house in the street, on the left. Then, a night or two ago, I saw a shadow in the garden from my bedroom window. Is that all?" "Yes." He thought and then made a suggestion: "Would you allow two of my men to sleep downstairs, in one of the ground floor rooms?" "Two of your men?" "Oh, you need not be afraid. Old Charolais and his son; and they don't look in the least like what they are. You will be quite safe with them. As for me..." He hesitated. He was waiting for her to ask him to come again. As she was silent, he said: "As for me, it is better that I should not be seen here. Yes, it is better. For your sake. My men will let me know how things go on." He would have liked to say more and to remain and to sit down beside her and comfort her. But he had a feeling that they had said all that they had to say and that a single word more, on his side, would be an insult. Then he made her a very low bow and went away. He went up the garden, walking quickly, in his haste to be outside and master his emotion. The footman was waiting for him at the hall door. As he passed out into the street, somebody rang, a young woman. He gave a start. "Geneviève!" She fixed a pair of astonished eyes upon him and at once recognized him, although bewildered by the extreme youthfulness of his appearance. And this gave her such a shock that she staggered and had to lean against the door for support. He had taken off his hat and was looking at her without daring to put out his hand. Would she put out hers? He was no longer Prince Sernine, he was Arsène Lupin, and she knew that he was Arsène Lupin and that he had just come out of prison. It was raining outside. She gave her umbrella to the footman and said: "Please open it and put it somewhere to dry." Then she walked straight in. "My poor old chap," said Lupin to himself, as he walked away. "What a series of blows for a sensitive and highly strung creature like yourself! You must keep a watch on your heart, or... Ah, what next? Here are my eyes beginning to water now. That's a bad sign. M. Lupin, you're growing old." He gave a tap on the shoulder to a young man who was crossing the Chaussée de la Muette and going toward the Rue des Vignes. The young man stopped, stared at him and said: "I beg your pardon, monsieur, but I don't think I have the honour." "Think again, my dear Monsieur le Duc. Or has your memory quite gone? Don't you remember Versailles and the little room at the Hôtel des Trois Empereurs?" The young man bounded backwards. "You!" "Why, yes, I. Prince Sernine, or rather Lupin, since you know my real name. Did you think that Lupin had departed this life? Oh, yes, I see. Prison. You were hoping. Get out, you baby." He patted him gently on the shoulder. "There, there, young fellow, don't be frightened. You have still a few nice quiet days left to write your poems in. The time has not yet come. Write your verses, poet." Then he gripped Leduc's arm violently and, looking him full in the face, said: "But the time is drawing near, poet. Don't forget that you belong to me, body and soul. And prepare to play your part. It will be a hard and magnificent part. And as I live, I believe you're the man to play it." He burst out laughing, turned on one foot and left young Leduc astounded. A little further, at the corner of the Rue de la Pompe, stood the wine shop of which Mrs. Kesselbach had spoken to him. He went in and had a long talk with the proprietor. Then he took a taxi and drove to the Grand Hotel, where he was staying under the name of André Beauny, and found the brothers Doudeville waiting for him. Lupin, though used to that sort of pleasure, nevertheless enjoyed the marks of admiration and devotion with which his friends overwhelmed him. "But, governor, tell us, what happened? We're accustomed to all sorts of wonders with you, but still there are limits. So you are free, and here you are, in the heart of Paris, scarcely disguised." "Have a cigar," said Lupin. "Thank you, no." "You're wrong, Doudeville. These are worth smoking. I have them from a great connoisseur, who is good enough to call himself my friend." "Oh, may one ask?" "The Kaiser. Come, don't look so flabbergasted, the two of you. And tell me things. I haven't seen the papers. What effect did my escape have on the public?" "Tremendous, governor." "What was the police version?" "Your flight took place at Garches, during an attempt to re enact the murder of Altenheim. Unfortunately, the journalists have proved that it was impossible." "After that?" "After that, a general fluster. People wondering, laughing and enjoying themselves like mad." "Weber?" "Weber is badly let in." "Apart from that, no news at the detective office? Nothing discovered about the murderer? No clue to help us establish Altenheim's identity?" "No." "What fools they are! And to think that we pay millions a year to keep those people! If this sort of thing goes on, I shall refuse to pay my rates. Take a seat and a pen. I will dictate a letter which you must hand in to the Grand Journal this evening. The world has been waiting for news of me long enough. It must be gasping with impatience. Write." He dictated: "To the editor of the Grand Journal. Sir, I must apologize to your readers for disappointing their legitimate impatience. I have escaped from prison and I cannot possibly reveal how I escaped. In the same way, since my escape, I have discovered the famous secret and I cannot possibly disclose what the secret is nor how I discovered it. All this will, some day or other, form the subject of a rather original story which my biographer in ordinary will publish from my notes. It will form a page of the history of France which our grandchildren will read with interest. For the moment, I have more important matters to attend to. Disgusted at seeing into what hands the functions which I once exercised have fallen, tired of finding the Kesselbach Altenheim case still dragging along, I am discharging M. Weber and resuming the post of honour which I occupied with such distinction and to the general satisfaction under the name of M. Lenormand. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Arsène Lupin, chief of the detective service." At 8 o'clock in the evening, Arsène Lupin and Jean Doudeville walked into Caillard, the fashionable restaurant, Lupin in evening clothes, but dressed like an artist, with rather wide trousers and a rather loose tie, and Doudeville in a frock coat, with the serious air and appearance of a magistrate. They sat down in that part of the restaurant which is set back and divided from the big room by 2 columns. A head waiter, perfectly dressed and supercilious in manner, came to take their orders, note book in hand. Lupin selected the dinner with the nice thought of an accomplished epicure. "Certainly," he said, "the prison ordinary was quite acceptable, but all the same it is nice to have a carefully ordered meal." He ate with a good appetite and silently, contenting himself with uttering, from time to time, a short sentence that marked his train of thought. "Of course I shall manage. But it will be a hard job. Such an adversary. What staggers me is that, after 6 months' fighting, I don't even know what he wants. His chief accomplice is dead. We are near the end of the battle and yet, even now, I can't understand his game. What is the wretch after? My own plan is quite clear: to lay hands on the Grand Duchy, to shove a Grand Duke of my own making on the throne, to give him Geneviève for a wife, and to reign. That is what I call lucid, honest and fair. But he, the low fellow, the ghost in the dark, what is he aiming at?" He called: "Waiter!" The head waiter came up. "Yes, sir." "Cigars." The head waiter stalked away, returned and opened a number of boxes. "Which do you recommend?" "These Upmanns are very good, sir." Lupin gave Doudeville an Upmann, took one for himself and cut it. The head waiter struck a match and held it for him. With a sudden movement, Lupin caught him by the wrist: "Not a word. I know you. Your real name is Dominique Lecas." The man, who was big and strong, tried to struggle away. He stifled a cry of pain. Lupin had twisted his wrist. "Your name is Dominique. You live in the Rue de la Pompe, on the 4th floor, where you retired with a small fortune acquired in the service. Listen to me, you fool, will you, or I'll break every bone in your body. Acquired in the service of Baron Altenheim, at whose house you were butler." The other stood motionless, his face pallid with fear. Around them, the small room was empty. In the restaurant beside it, 3 gentlemen sat smoking and 2 couples were chatting over their liquors. "You see, we are quiet. We can talk." "Who are you? Who are you? Don't you recollect me? Why, think of that famous luncheon in the Villa Dupont. You yourself, you old flunkey, handed me the plate of cakes. And such cakes!" "Prince," stammered the other. "Yes, yes, Prince Arsène. Prince Lupin, in person. Aha, you breathe again! You're saying to yourself that you have nothing to fear from Lupin, isn't that it? Well, you're wrong, old chap, you have everything to fear." He took a card from his pocket and showed it to him. "There, look, I belong to the police now. Can't be helped, that's what we all come to in the end, all of us robber kings and emperors of crime." "Well?" said the head waiter, still greatly alarmed. "Well, go to that customer over there, who's calling you, get him what he wants and come back to me. And no nonsense, mind you. Don't go trying to get away. I have 10 men outside, with orders to keep their eyes on you. Be off." The head waiter obeyed. 5 minutes after, he returned and, standing in front of the table, with his back to the restaurant, as though discussing the quality of the cigars with his customers, he said: "Well, what is it?" Lupin laid a number of 100-franc notes in a row on the table. "1 note for each definite answer to my questions." "Done." "Now then, how many of you were there with Baron Altenheim?" "7, without counting myself." "No more?" "No. Once only, we picked up some workmen in Italy to make the underground passage from the Villa des Glycines at Garches." "Were there 2 underground passages?" "Yes, one led to the Pavillon Hortense and the other branched off from the first and ran under Mrs. Kesselbach's house." "What was the object?" "To carry off Mrs. Kesselbach." "Were the 2 maids, Suzanne and Gertrude, accomplices?" "Yes." "Where are they?" "Abroad." "And your 7 pals, those of the Altenheim gang?" "I have left them. They are still going on." "Where can I find them?" Dominique hesitated. Lupin unfolded 2 notes of 1,000 francs each and said: Your scruples do you honour, Dominique. There's nothing for it but to swallow them like a man and answer." Dominique replied: "You will find them at No. 3, Route de la Revolte, Neuilly. One of them is called the Broker." "Capital. And now the name, the real name of Altenheim. Do you know it?" "Yes, Ribeira." "Dominique, you're asking for trouble. Ribeira was only an assumed name. I asked you the real name." "Parbury." "That's another assumed name." The head waiter hesitated. Lupin unfolded 300-franc notes. "Pshaw! What do I care?" said the man. "After all, he's dead, isn't he? Quite dead." "His name," said Lupin. "His name? The Chevalier de Malreich." Lupin gave a jump in his chair. "What? What do you say? The Chevalier? Say it again. The Chevalier?" "Raoul de Malreich." A long pause. Lupin, with his eyes fixed before him, thought of the mad girl at Veldenz, who had died by poison. Isilda bore the same name, Malreich, and it was the name borne by the small French noble who came to the court of Veldenz in the 18th century. He resumed his questions. "What country did this Malreich belong to?" "He was of French origin, but born in Germany. I saw some papers once. That was how I came to know his name. Oh, if he had found it out, he would have wrung my neck, I believe." Lupin reflected and said: "Did he command the lot of you?" "Yes." "But he had an accomplice, a partner?" "Oh, hush, hush!" The head waiter's face suddenly expressed the most intense alarm. Lupin noticed the same sort of terror and repulsion which he himself felt when he thought of the murderer. "Who is he? Have you seen him?" "Oh, don't let us talk of that one. It doesn't do to talk of him." "Who is he, I'm asking you?" "He's the master, the chief. Nobody knows him." "But you've seen him, you. Answer me. Have you seen him?" "Sometimes, in the dark, at night. Never by daylight. His orders come on little scraps of paper ... or by telephone." "His name?" "I don't know it. We never used to speak of him. It was unlucky." "He dresses in black, doesn't he?" "Yes, in black. He is short and slender, with fair hair." "And he kills, doesn't he?" "Yes, he kills. He kills where another might steal a bit of bread." His voice shook. He entreated: "Let us stop this. It won't do to talk of him. I tell you, it's unlucky." Lupin was silent, impressed, in spite of himself, by the man's anguish. He sat long thinking and then rose and said to the head waiter: "Here's your money. But, if you want to live in peace, you will do well not to breathe a word of our conversation to anybody." He left the restaurant with Doudeville and walked to the Porte Saint Denis, without speaking, absorbed in all that he had heard. At last, he seized his companion's arm and said: "Listen to me, Doudeville, carefully. Go to the Gare du Nord. You will get there in time to catch the Luxembourg express. Go to Veldenz, the capital of the Grand Duchy of Zweibrucken Veldenz. At the town hall, you will easily obtain the birth certificate of the Chevalier de Malreich and further information about the family. You will be back on the day after to morrow, that will be Saturday." "Am I to let them know at the detective office?" "I'll see to that. I shall telephone that you are ill. Oh, one word more. On Saturday, meet me at 12 o'clock in a little café on the Route de la Revolte, called the Restaurant Buffalo. Come dressed as a workman." The next day, Lupin, wearing a short smock and a cap, went down to Neuilly and began his investigations at No. 3, Route de la Revolte. A gateway opened into an outer yard; and here he found a huge block of workmen's dwellings, a whole series of passages and workshops, with a swarming population of artisans, women and brats. In a few minutes he had won the goodwill of the portress, with whom he chatted for an hour on the most varied topics. During this hour he saw 3 men pass, one after the other, whose manner struck him. "That's game," he thought, "and gamey game at that. They follow one another by scent. Look quite respectable, of course, but with the eye of the hunted deer which knows that the enemy is all around and that every tuft, every blade of grass may conceal an ambush." That afternoon and on the Saturday morning he pursued his inquiries and made certain that Altenheim's 7 accomplices all lived on the premises. 4 of them openly followed the trade of second hand clothes dealers. 2 of the others sold newspapers; and the third described himself as a broker and was nicknamed accordingly. They went in and out, one after the other, without appearing to know one another. But, in the evening, Lupin discovered that they met in a sort of coach house situated right at the back of the last of the yards, a place in which the Broker kept his wares piled up: old iron, broken kitchen ranges, rusty stove pipes; and also, no doubt, the best part of the stolen goods. "Come," he said, "the work is shaping nicely. I asked my cousin of Germany for a month, and I believe a fortnight will be enough for my purpose. And what I like about it is that I shall start operations with the scoundrels who made me take a header in the Seine. My poor old Gourel, I shall revenge you at last, and high time too." At 12 o'clock on Saturday he went to the Restaurant Buffalo, a little low-ceilinged room to which bricklayers and cab drivers resorted for their midday meal. Some one came and sat down beside him. "It's done, governor." "Ah, is it you, Doudeville? That's right. I'm dying to know. Have you the particulars? The birth certificate? Quick, tell me." "Well, it's like this. Altenheim's father and mother died abroad." "Never mind about them." "They left 3 children." "3?" "Yes. The eldest would have been 30 years old by now. His name was Raoul de Malreich." "That's our man, Altenheim. Next?" "The youngest of the children was a girl, Isilda. The register has an entry in fresh ink, 'Deceased.'" "Isilda, Isilda," repeated Lupin. "That's just what I thought. Isilda was Altenheim's sister. I saw a look in her face which I seemed to recognize. So that was the link between them. But the other, the third child, or rather the second?" "A son. He would be 26 by now." "His name?" "Louis de Malreich." Lupin gave a little start. "That's it! Louis de Malreich. The initials L.M. The awful and terrifying signature! The murderer's name is Louis de Malreich. He was the brother of Altenheim and the brother of Isilda and he killed both of them for fear of what they might reveal." Lupin sat long, silent and gloomy under the obsession, no doubt, of the mysterious being. Doudeville objected: "What had he to fear from his sister Isilda? She was mad, they told me." "Mad, yes, but capable of remembering certain details of her childhood. She must have recognized the brother with whom she grew up; and that recollection cost her her life." And he added, "Mad, but all those people were mad. The mother was mad, the father a dipsomaniac, Altenheim a regular brute beast, Isilda a poor innocent. As for the other, the murderer, he is the monster, the crazy lunatic." "Crazy? Do you think so, governor?" "Yes, crazy. With flashes of genius, of devilish cunning and intuition, but a cracked-brained fool, a madman, like all that Malreich family. Only madmen kill, and especially madmen of his stamp. For, after all...." He interrupted himself, and his face underwent so great a change that Doudeville was struck by it. "What's the matter, governor?" "Look." A man had entered and hung his hat, a soft, black felt hat, on a peg. He sat down at a little table, examined the bill of fare which a waiter brought him, gave his order and waited motionless, with his body stiff and erect and his 2 arms crossed over the tablecloth. And Lupin saw him, full face. He had a lean, hard visage, absolutely smooth and pierced with 2 sockets, in the depths of which appeared a pair of steel gray eyes. The skin seemed stretched from bone to bone, like a sheet of parchment, so stiff and so thick that not a hair could have penetrated through it. And the face was dismal and dull. No expression enlivened it, no thought seemed to abide under that ivory forehead; and the eyelids, entirely devoid of lashes, never flickered, which gave the eyes the fixed look of the eyes in a statue. Lupin beckoned to one of the waiters: "Who is that gentleman?" "The one eating his lunch over there?" "Yes." "He is a customer. He comes here 2 or 3 times a week." "Can you tell me his name?" "Why, yes, Léon Massier." "Oh!" blurted Lupin, very excitedly. "L.M., the same 2 letters. Could it be Louis de Malreich?" He watched him eagerly. Indeed, the man's appearance agreed with Lupin's conjectures, with what he knew of him and of his hideous mode of existence. But what puzzled him was that look of death about him. Where he anticipated life and fire, where he would have expected to find the torment, the disorder, the violent facial distortion of the great accursed, he beheld sheer impassiveness. He asked the waiter: "What does he do?" "I really can't say. He's a rum cove. He's always quite alone. He never talks to anybody. We here don't even know the sound of his voice. He points his finger at the dishes on the bill of fare which he wants. He has finished in 20 minutes. Then he pays and goes." "And he comes back again?" "Every 3 or 4 days. He's not regular." "It's he, it cannot be any one else," said Lupin to himself. "It's Malreich. There he is, breathing, at 4 steps from me. There are the hands that kill. There is the brain that gloats upon the smell of blood. There is the monster, the vampire. And yet, was it possible? Lupin had ended by looking upon Malreich as so fantastic a being that he was disconcerted at seeing him in the flesh, coming, going, moving. He could not explain to himself how the man could eat bread and meat like other men, drink beer like any one else, this man whom he had pictured as a foul beast, feeding on live flesh and sucking the blood of his victims. "Come away, Doudeville." "What's the matter with you, governor? You look quite white." "I want air. Come out." Outside, he drew a deep breath, wiped the perspiration from his forehead and muttered: "That's better. I was stifling." And, mastering himself, he added: "Now we must play our game cautiously and not lose sight of his tracks." "Hadn't we better separate, governor? Our man saw us together. He will take less notice of us singly." "Did he see us?" said Lupin, pensively. "He seems to me to see nothing, to hear nothing and to look at nothing. What a bewildering specimen!" And, in fact, 10 minutes later, Leon Massier appeared and walked away, without even looking to see if he was followed. He had lit a cigarette and smoked, with one of his hands behind his back, strolling along like a saunterer enjoying the sunshine and the fresh air and never suspecting that his movements could possibly be watched. He passed through the toll gates, skirted the fortifications, went out again through the Porte Champerret and retraced his steps along the Route de la Revolte. Would he enter the buildings at No. 3? Lupin eagerly hoped that he would, for that would have been a certain proof of his complicity with the Altenheim gang. But the man turned round and made for the Rue de l'Esemant, which he followed until he passed the Velodrome Buffalo. On the left, opposite the cycling track, between the public tennis court and the booths that line the Rue d'Alesement, stood a small detached villa, surrounded by a scanty garden. Leon Massier stopped, took out his keys, opened first the gate of the garden and then the door of the house and disappeared. Lupin crept forward cautiously. He at once noticed that the block in the Rue de la Revolte stretched back as far as the garden wall. Coming still nearer, he saw that the wall was very high and that a coach-house rested against it at the bottom of the garden. The position of the buildings was such as to give him the certainty that his coach-house stood back to back with the coach-house in the inner yard of No. 3, which served as a lumber room for the Broker. Leon Massier, therefore, occupied a house adjoining the place in which the 7 members of the Altenheim gang held their meetings. Consequently, Leon Massier was, in point of fact, the supreme leader who commanded that gang, and there was evidently a passage between the 2 coach-houses through which he communicated with his followers. "I was right," said Lupin. "Leon Massier and Louis de Malreich are one and the same man. The situation is much simpler than it was." "There is no doubt about that," said Doudeville, "and everything will be settled in a few days. That is to say, I shall have been stabbed in the throat." "What are you saying, governor? There's an idea!" "Pooh, who knows? I have always had a presentiment that that monster would bring me ill luck." Thenceforth it became a matter of watching Malreich's life in such a way that none of his movements went unobserved. This life was of the oddest, if one could believe the people of the neighbourhood whom Doudeville questioned. The bloke from the villa, as they called him, had been living there for a few months only. He saw and received nobody. He was not known to keep a servant of any kind; and the windows, though they were left wide open, even at night, always remained dark and were never lit with the glow of a lamp or candle. Moreover, Leon Massier most often went out at the close of day and did not come in again until very late, at dawn, said people who had come upon him at sunrise. "And does any one know what he does?" asked Lupin of his companion, when they next met. "No, he leads an absolutely irregular existence. He sometimes disappears for several days together, or, rather, he remains indoors. When all is said, nobody knows anything." "Well, we shall know, and that soon." He was wrong. After a week of continuous efforts and investigations, he had learnt no more than before about that strange individual. The extraordinary thing that constantly happened was this, that suddenly, while Lupin was following him, the man, who was ambling with short steps along the streets, without ever turning round or ever stopping, the man would vanish as if by a miracle. True, he sometimes went through houses with 2 entrances, but at other times he seemed to fade away in the midst of the crowd, like a ghost. And Lupin was left behind, petrified, astounded, filled with rage and confusion. He at once hurried to the Rue d'Alesement and stood on guard outside the villa. Minutes followed upon minutes, half hour upon half hour. A part of the night slipped away. Then, suddenly, the mysterious man hove in sight. What could he have been doing? "An express message for you, governor," said Doudeville, at 8 o'clock one evening, as he joined him in the Rue Delaizement. Lupin opened the envelope. Mrs. Kesselbach implored him to come to her aid. It appeared that two men had taken up their stand under her windows, at night, and one of them had said: "What luck! We've dazzled them completely this time. So it's understood: we shall strike the blow to night." Mrs. Kesselbach thereupon went downstairs and discovered that the shutter in the pantry did not fasten, or, at least, that it could be opened from the outside. "At last," said Lupin, "it's the enemy himself who offers to give battle. That's a good thing. I'm tired of marching up and down under Malreich's windows." "Is he there at this moment?" "No, he played me one of his tricks again in Paris, just as I was about to play him one of mine. But, first of all, listen to me, Doudeville. Go and collect 10 of our men and bring them to the Rue des Vignes. Look here, bring Marco and Jérôme, the messenger. I have given them a holiday since the business at the Palace Hotel. Let them come this time. Daddy Charolais and his son ought to be mounting guard by now. Make your arrangements with them and, at 11:30, come and join me at the corner of the Rue des Vignes and the Rue Raynouard. There we will watch the house." Doudeville went away. Lupin waited for an hour longer, until that quiet thoroughfare, the Rue Delaizement, was quite deserted, and then, seeing that Leon Massier did not return, he made up his mind and went up to the villa. There was no one in sight. He took a run and jumped on the stone ledge that supported the railings of the garden. A few minutes later, he was inside. His plan was to force the door of the house and search the rooms in order to find the Emperor's letters which Malreich had stolen from Veldenz. But he thought a visit to the coach house of more immediate importance. He was much surprised to see that it was open and, next, to find, by the light of his electric lantern, that it was absolutely empty and that there was no door in the back wall. He hunted about for a long time, but met with no more success. Outside, however, he saw a ladder standing against the coach house and obviously serving as a means of reaching a sort of loft contrived under the slate roof. The loft was blocked with old packing cases, trusses of straw and gardener's frames, or rather it seemed to be blocked, for he very soon discovered a gangway that took him to the wall. Here, he knocked up against a cucumber frame, which he tried to move. Failing to effect his purpose, he examined the frame more closely and found, first, that it was fixed to the wall, and, secondly, that one of the panes was missing. He passed his arm through and encountered space. He cast the bright light of the lantern through the aperture and saw a big shed, a coach house larger than that of the villa and filled with old ironwork and objects of every kind. "That's it," said Lupin to himself. "This window has been contrived in the Broker's lumber room, right up at the top, and from here Louis de Malreich sees, hears and watches his accomplices, without being seen or heard by them. I now understand how it is that they do not know their leader." Having found out what he wanted, he put out his light and was on the point of leaving when a door opened opposite him, down below. Some one came in and lit a lamp. He recognized the Broker. He thereupon resolved to stay where he was, since the expedition, after all, could not be done so long as that man was there. The Broker took 2 revolvers from his pocket. He tested the triggers and changed the cartridges, whistling a music-hall tune as he did so. An hour elapsed in this way. Lupin was beginning to grow restless, without, however, making up his mind to go. More minutes passed, half an hour, an hour. At last, the man said aloud: "Come in." One of the scoundrels slipped into the shed; and, one after the other, a third arrived and a fourth. "We are all here," said the Broker. "Dieudonne and Chubby will meet us down there. Come, we've no time to lose. Are you armed?" "To the teeth." "That's all right. It'll be hot work." "How do you know, Broker?" "I've seen the chief." "When I say that I've seen him, no. But he spoke to me." "Yes," said one of the men, "in the dark, at a street corner, as usual. Ah, Altenheim's ways were better than that. At least one knew what one was doing." "And don't you know?" retorted the Broker. "We're breaking in at the Kesselbach woman's." "And what about the 2 watchers, the 2 coves whom Lupin posted there?" "That's their lookout. There's 7 of us. They had better give us as little trouble as possible." "What about the Kesselbach?" "Gag her first, then bind her and bring her here. There, on that old sofa, and then wait for orders." "Is the job well paid?" "The Kesselbach's jewels, to begin with." "Yes, if it comes off. But I'm speaking of the certainty." 300 franc notes apiece, beforehand, and twice as much again afterwards." "Have you the money?" "Yes." "That's all right. You can say what you like, but, as far as paying goes, there's no one to equal that bloke." And, in a voice so low that Lupin could hardly hear: "I say, Broker, if we're obliged to use the knife, Is there a reward?" "The same as usual, 2,000. "If it's Lupin?" "3,000. Oh, if we could only get him!" One after the other, they left the lumber room. Lupin heard the Broker's parting words: "This is the plan of attack. We divide into 3 lots. A whistle and every one runs forward." Lupin hurriedly left his hiding place, went down the ladder, ran round the house, without going in, and climbed back over the railings. "The Broker's right. It'll be hot work. Ah, it's my skin they're after! A reward for Lupin! The rascals!" He passed through the toll gate and jumped into a taxi. "Rue Raynouard." He stopped the cab at 200 yards from the Rue des Vignes and walked to the corner of the 2 streets. To his great surprise, Doudeville was not there. "That's funny," said Lupin. "It's past 12. This business looks suspicious to me." He waited 10 minutes, 20 minutes. At 12:30, nobody had arrived. Further delay was dangerous. After all, if Doudeville and his men were prevented from coming, Charolais, his son, and he, Lupin, himself, were enough to repel the attack, without counting the assistance of the servants. He therefore went ahead. But he caught sight of 2 men who tried to hide in the shadow of a corner wall. "Hang it!" he said. "That's the vanguard of the gang, Dieudonne and Chubby. I've allowed myself to be outdistanced, like a fool." Here he lost more time. Should he go straight up to them, disable them and then climb into the house through the pantry window, which he knew to be unlocked? That would be the most prudent course and would enable him, moreover, to take Mrs. Kesselbach away at once and to remove her to a place of safety. Yes, but it also meant the failure of his plan. It meant missing this glorious opportunity of trapping the whole gang, including Louis de Malreich himself, without doubt. Suddenly, a whistle sounded from somewhere on the other side of the house. Was it the rest of the gang, so soon? And was an offensive movement to be made from the garden? But, at the preconcerted signal, the 2 men climbed through the window and disappeared from view. Lupin scaled the balcony at a bound and jumped into the pantry. By the sound of their footsteps, he judged that the assailants had gone into the garden; and the sound was so distinct that he felt easy in his mind. Charolais and his son could not fail to hear the noise. He therefore went upstairs. Mrs. Kesselbach's bedroom was on the first landing. He walked in without knocking. A night light was burning in the room; and he saw Dolores, on a sofa, fainting. He ran up to her, lifted her and, in a voice of command, forcing her to answer: "Listen, Charolais, his son, where are they?" She stammered: "Why, what do you mean? They're gone, of course." "What, gone?" "You sent me word an hour ago. A telephone message." He picked up a piece of blue paper lying beside her and read: "Send the 2 watchers away at once and all my men. Tell them to meet me at the Grand Hotel. Have no fear." "Thunder! And you believed it? But your servants?" "Gone." He went up to the window. Outside, 3 men were coming from the other end of the garden. From the window in the next room, which looked out on the street, he saw 2 others, on the pavement. And he thought of Dieudonne, of Chubby, of Louis de Malreich, above all, who must now be prowling around, invisible and formidable. "Hang it!" he muttered. "I half believe they've done me this time." Chapter 14. Chapter 14 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice LEBLANC. Chapter 14. The Man in Black. At that moment, Arsène Lupin felt the impression, the certainty, that he had been drawn into an ambush, by means which he had not the time to perceive, but of which he guessed the prodigious skill and address. Everything had been calculated, everything ordained: the dismissal of his men, the disappearance or treachery of the servants, his own presence in Mrs. Kesselbach's house. Clearly, the whole thing had succeeded, exactly as the enemy wished, thanks to circumstances almost miraculously fortunate. For, after all, he might have arrived before the false message had sent his friends away. But then there would have been a battle between his own gang and the Altenheim gang. And Lupin, remembering Malreich's conduct, the murder of Altenheim, the poisoning of the mad girl at Veldenz, Lupin asked himself whether the ambush was aimed at him alone or whether Malreich had not contemplated the possibility of a general scuffle, involving the killing of accomplices who had by this time become irksome to him. It was an intuition rather, a fleeting idea that just passed through his mind. The hour was one for action. He must defend Dolores, the abduction of whom was, in all likelihood, the first and foremost reason of the attack. He half opened the casement window on the street and levelled his revolver. A shot, rousing and alarming the neighbourhood, and the scoundrels would take to their heels. "Well, no," he muttered. "No, it shall not be said that I shirked the fight. The opportunity is too good. And then, who says that they would run away? There are too many of them to care about the neighbours." He returned to Dolores's room. There was a noise downstairs. He listened and, finding that it came from the staircase, he locked the door. Dolores was crying and throwing herself about the sofa. He implored her: "Are you strong enough? We are on the first floor. I could help you down. We can lower the sheets from the window." "No, no, don't leave me. I'm frightened. I haven't the strength. They will kill me. Oh, protect me." He took her in his arms and carried her to the next room, and, bending over her: "Don't move and keep calm. I swear to you that not one of those men shall touch you as long as I am alive." The door of the first room was tried. Dolores, clinging to him with all her might, cried: "Oh, there they are! There they are! They will kill you! You are alone!" Eagerly he said: "No, I am not alone. You are here. You are here beside me." He tried to release himself. She took his head in her two hands, looked him deep in the eyes and whispered: "Where are you going? What are you going to do? No, you must not die. I won't have it. You must live. You must." She stammered words which he did not catch and which she seemed to stifle between her lips lest he should hear them. And, having spent all her energy, exhausted, she fell back unconscious. He leant over her and gazed at her for a moment. Softly, lightly, he pressed a kiss upon her hair. Then he went back to the first room, carefully closed the door between the two and switched on the electric light. "One second, my lads," he cried. "You seem in a great hurry to get yourselves smashed to pieces. Don't you know that Lupin's here? I'll make you dance." While speaking, he unfolded a screen in such a way as to hide the sofa on which Mrs. Kesselbach had been lying, and he now spread dresses and coverings over it. The door was on the point of giving way under the blows of the men outside. "Here I am. Coming. Are you ready? Now, gentlemen, one at a time." He briskly turned the key and drew the bolt. Shouts, threats, a roar of infuriated animals came through the open doorway. Yet none of them dared come forward. Before rushing at Lupin, they hesitated, seized with alarm, with fear. This was what he had reckoned on. Standing in the middle of the room, full in the light, with outstretched arm, he held between his fingers a sheaf of bank notes, which he divided, counting them one by one, into 7 equal shares. And he calmly said: 3,000 francs reward for each of you, if Lupin is sent to his last account. That's what you were promised, isn't it? Here's double the money." He laid the bundles on the table, within reach of the scoundrels. The Broker roared: "Humbug! He's trying to gain time. Shoot him down." He raised his arm. His companions held him back. And Lupin continued: "Of course, this need not affect your plan of campaign. You came here, first, to kidnap Mrs. Kesselbach and, secondly, to lay hands on her jewels. Far be it from me to interfere with your laudable intentions." "Look here, what are you driving at?" growled the Broker, listening in spite of himself. "Aha, Broker, I'm beginning to interest you, am I? Come in, old chap. Come in, all of you. There's a draught at the top of those stairs; and such pretty fellows as you mustn't run the risk of catching cold. What, are we afraid? Why, I'm all by myself. Come, pull yourself together, my lambs." They entered the room, puzzled and suspicious. "Shut the door, Broker. We shall be more comfortable." "Thanks, old man. Oh, by the way, I see the notes are gone. Therefore we're agreed. How easy it is for honest men to come to terms!" "Well? And next?" "Next? Well, as we're partners." "Partners? Why, haven't you accepted my money? We're working together, old man, and we will carry off the young woman together first and carry off the jewels after." The Broker grinned: "Don't want you for that." "Yes, you do, old man." "Why?" "Because you don't know where the jewels are hidden and I do." "We'll find out." "To morrow, not to night." "Well, let's hear. What do you want?" "My share of the jewels." "Why didn't you take the lot, as you know where they are?" Can't get at them by myself. There's a way of doing it, but I don't know it. You're here, so I'm making use of you." The Broker hesitated. "Share the jewels. Share the jewels. A few bits of glass and brass, most likely." "You fool! There's more than a million's worth." The men quivered under the impression made upon them. "Very well," said the Broker. "But suppose the Kesselbach gets away? She's in the next room, isn't she?" "No, she's in here." Lupin for a moment pulled back one of the leaves of the screen, revealing the heap of dresses and bedclothes which he had laid out on the sofa. "She's here, fainting, but I shan't give her up till we're divided." "Still—" "You can take it or leave it. I don't care if I am alone. You know what I'm good for. So please yourselves." The men consulted with one another and the Broker said: "Where is the hiding place you're talking of?" "Under the fireplace. But, when you don't know the secret, you must first lift up the whole chimney-piece, looking-glass, marble and all in a lump, it seems. It's no easy job." "Pooh! We're a smart lot, we are. Just you wait and see, in 5 minutes." He gave his orders and his pals at once set to work with admirable vigour and discipline. 2 of them, standing on chairs, tried to lift the mirror. The 4 others attacked the fireplace itself. The Broker, on his knees, kept his eyes on the hearth and gave the word of command: "Cheerily, lads! All together, if you please! Look out! 1, 2 Ah, there, it's moving!" Standing behind them, with his hands in his pockets, Lupin watched them affectionately and, at the same time, revelled with all his pride, as an artist and master, in this striking proof of his authority, of his might, of the incredible sway which he wielded over others. How could those scoundrels for a second accept that improbable story and lose all sense of things, to the point of relinquishing every chance of the fight in his favour? He took from his pockets 2 great massive and formidable revolvers and, calmly choosing the first 2 men whom he would bring down and the 2 who would fall next, he aimed as he might have aimed at a pair of targets in a rifle gallery. 2 shots together and 2 more. Loud yells of pain, 4 men came tumbling down, one after the other, like dolls at a cock-shy. "4 from 7 leaves 3," said Lupin. "Shall I go on?" His arms remained outstretched, levelled at the Broker and his 2 pals. "You swine!" growled the Broker, feeling for a weapon. "Hands up!" cried Lupin, "or I fire. That's it. Now you 2, take away his toys. If not—" The 2 scoundrels, shaking with fear, caught hold of their leader and compelled him to submit. "Bind him! Bind him, confound it! What difference does it make to you? Once I'm gone, you're all free. Come along. Have you finished? The wrists first. With your belts. And the ankles. Hurry up!" The Broker, beaten and disabled, made no further resistance. While his pals were binding him, Lupin stooped over them and dealt them 2 terrific blows on the head with the butt end of his revolver. They sank down in a heap. "That's a good piece of work," he said, taking breath. "Pity there are not another 50 of them. I was just in the mood. And all so easily done. With a smile on one's face. What do you think of it, Broker?" The scoundrel lay cursing. Lupin said: "Cheer up, old man. Console yourself with the thought that you are helping in a good action: the rescue of Mrs. Kesselbach. She will thank you in person for your gallantry." He went to the door of the second room and opened it. "What's this?" he said, stopping on the threshold, taken aback, dumbfounded. The room was empty. He went to the window, saw a ladder leaning against the balcony, a telescopic steel ladder, and muttered: "Kidnapped. Kidnapped. Louis de Malreich. Oh, the villain!" He reflected for a minute, trying to master his anguish of mind, and said to himself that, after all, as Mrs. Kesselbach seemed to be in no immediate danger, there was no cause for alarm. But he was seized with a sudden fit of rage and flew at the 7 scoundrels, gave a kick or 2 to those of the wounded who stirred, felt for his bank-notes and put them back in his pocket, then gagged the men's mouths and tied their hands with anything that he could find: blind cords, curtain loops, blankets and sheets reduced to strips; and, lastly, laid in a row on the carpet, in front of the sofa, 7 bundles of humanity, packed tight together and tied up like so many parcels. "Mummies on toast," he chuckled. "A dainty dish for those who like that sort of thing. You pack of fools, how does this suit you, eh? There you are, like corpses at the Morgue. Serves you right for attacking Lupin. Lupin, the protector of the widow and orphan. Are you trembling? Quite unnecessary, my lambs. Lupin never hurt a fly yet. Only Lupin is a decent man, he can't stand vermin, and the Lupin knows his duty. I ask you, is life possible with a lot of scamps like you about? Think of it: no respect for other people's lives, no respect for property, for laws, for society, no conscience, no anything. What are we coming to? Lord, what are we coming to?" Without even taking the trouble to lock them in, he left the room, went down the street and walked until he came to his taxi. He sent the driver in search of another and brought both cabs back to Mrs. Kesselbach's house. A good tip, paid in advance, avoided all tedious explanations. With the help of the two men, he carried the 7 prisoners down and plumped them anyhow, on one another's knees, into the cabs. The wounded men yelled and moaned. He shut the doors, shouting: "Mind your hands!" He got up beside the driver of the front cab. "Where to?" asked the man. 36 Quai des Orfèvres, the detective office." The motors throbbed, the driver started the gear and the strange procession went scooting down the slopes of the Trocadero. In the streets, they passed a few vegetable carts. Men carrying long poles were turning out the street lamps. There were stars in the sky. A cool breeze was wafted through the air. Lupin sang aloud: "The Place de la Concorde, the Louvre, in the distance, the dark bulk of Notre Dame." He turned round and half opened the door. "Having a good time, mates? So am I, thank you. It's a grand night for a drive, and the air's delicious." They were now bumping over the ill-paved quay. And soon they arrived at the Palais de Justice and the door of the detective office. "Wait here," said Lupin to the two drivers, "and be sure you look after your 7 fares." He crossed the outer yard and went down the passage on the right, leading to the rooms of the central office. He found the night inspectors on duty. "A bag, gentlemen," he said as he entered. "A fine bag, too. Is M. Weber here? I am the new commissary of police for Auteuil." "M. Weber is in his flat. Do you want him sent for?" "Just one second. I'm in a hurry. I'll leave a line for him." He sat down at a table and wrote: "My dear Weber, I am bringing you the 7 scoundrels composing Altenheim's gang, the men who killed Gourel and plenty of others, and who killed me as well, under the name of M. Lenormand. That only leaves their leader unaccounted for. I am going to effect his arrest this minute. Come and join me. He lives in the Rue d'Alaisement, at Neuilly, and goes by the name of Léon Massier. Kind regards, yours, Arsène Lupin, Chief of the Detective Service." He sealed the letter. "Give that to M. Weber. It's urgent. Now I want 7 men to receive the goods. I left them on the quay." On going back to the taxis, he was met by a chief inspector. "Ah, it's you, M. Leboeuf," he said. "I've made a fine haul: the whole of Altenheim's gang. They're there in the taxi cabs." "Where did you find them?" "Hard at work kidnapping Mrs. Kesselbach and robbing her house. But I'll tell you all about it when the time comes." The chief inspector took him aside and, with the air of surprise: "I beg your pardon, monsieur, but I was sent for to see the commissary of police for Auteuil. And I don't seem to... Whom have I the honour of addressing?" "Somebody who is making you a handsome present of 7 hooligans of the finest quality." "Still, I should like to know...." "My name?" "Yes." "Arsène Lupin." He nimbly tripped the chief inspector up, ran to the Rue de Rivoli, jumped into a passing taxi cab and drove to the Porte des Ternes. The Rue de la Révolte was close by. He went to number 3. For all his coolness and self-command, Arsène Lupin was unable to control his excitement. Would he find Dolores Kesselbach? Had Louis Malreich taken her either to his own place or to the broker's shed? Lupin had taken the key of the shed from the broker, so that it was easy for him, after ringing and walking across the different yards, to open the door and enter the lumber shop. He switched on his lantern and took his bearings. A little to the right was the free space in which he had seen the accomplices hold their last confabulation. On the sofa mentioned by the broker, he saw a black figure, Dolores, lay wrapped in blankets and gagged. He helped her up. "Oh, it's you! It's you!" she stammered. "They haven't touched you." And rising and pointing to the back of the shop: "There! He went out that side. I heard him, I'm sure. You must go, please." "I must get you away first," he said. "No, never mind me. Go after him. I entreat you, strike him." Fear, this time, instead of dejecting her, seemed to be giving her unwonted strength. And she repeated, with an immense longing to place her terrible enemy in his power: "Go after him first. I can't go on living like this. You must save me from him. I can't go on living." He unfastened her bonds, laid her carefully on the sofa and said: "You are right. Besides, you have nothing to fear here. Wait for me. I shall come back." As he was going away, she caught hold of his hand. "But you yourself...." "Well?" "If that man...." It was as though she dreaded for Lupin the great, final contest to which she was exposing him and as though, at the last moment, she would have been glad to hold him back. He said: "Thank you. Have no fear. What have I to be afraid of? He is alone." And, leaving her, he went to the back of the shed. As he expected, he found a ladder standing against the wall which brought him to the level of the little window through which he had watched the scoundrels hold their meeting. It was the way by which Malreich had returned to his house in the Rue Delaizement. He therefore took the same road, just as he had done a few hours earlier, climbed into the loft of the other coach house and down into the garden. He found himself at the back of the villa occupied by Malreich. Strange to say, he did not doubt for a moment that Malreich was there. He would meet him inevitably. The formidable battle which they were waging against each other was nearing its end. A few minutes more and, one way or another, all would be over. He was amazed, on grasping the handle of a door, to find that the handle turned and the door opened under his pressure. The villa was not even locked. He passed through a kitchen, a hall and up a staircase; and he walked deliberately, without seeking to deaden the sound of his footsteps. On the landing, he stopped. The perspiration streamed from his forehead and his temples throbbed under the rush of his blood. Nevertheless, he remained calm, master of himself and conscious of his least thoughts. He laid 2 revolvers on a stair. "No weapons," he said to himself. "My hands only, just the effort of my 2 hands. That's quite enough. That will be better." Opposite him were 3 doors. He chose the middle one, turned the handle and encountered no obstacle. He went in. There was no light in the room, but the rays of the night entered through the wide open window and, amid the darkness, he saw the sheets and the white curtains of the bed. And somebody was standing beside it. He savagely cast the gleam of his lantern upon that form. Malreich! The pallid face of Malreich, his dim eyes, his cadaverous cheek bones, his scraggy neck. And all this stood motionless, opposite him, at 5 steps' distance, and he could not have said whether that dull face, that death face, expressed the least terror or even a grain of anxiety. Lupin took a step forward. And a second. And a third. The man did not move. Did he see? Did he understand? It was as though the man's eyes were gazing into space and that he thought himself possessed by a hallucination, rather than looking upon a real image. One more step. "He will defend himself," thought Lupin. "He is bound to defend himself." And Lupin thrust out his arms. The man did not make a movement. He did not retreat. His eyelids did not blink. The contact took place. And it was Lupin, scared and bewildered, who lost his head. He knocked the man back upon his bed, stretched him at full length, rolled him in the sheets, bound him in the blankets and held him under his knee, like a prey. Whereas the man had not made the slightest movement of resistance. "Ah!" shouted Lupin, drunk with delight and satisfied hatred. "At last I have crushed you, you odious brute! At last I am the master!" He heard a noise outside, in the Rue Delaizement, men knocking at the gate. He ran to the window and cried: "Is that you, Weber? Already? Well done! You are a model servant. Break down the gate, old chap, and come up here. Delighted to see you." In a few minutes, he searched his prisoner's clothes, got hold of his pocket book, cleared the papers out of the drawers of the desk and the davenport, flung them on the table and went through them. He gave a shout of joy. The bundle of letters was there, the famous bundle of letters which he had promised to restore to the Emperor. He put back the papers in their place and went to the window. "It's all finished, Weber. You can come in. You will find Mr. Kesselbach's murderer in his bed, all ready tied up. Good bye, Weber." And Lupin, tearing down the stairs, ran to the coach house and went back to Dolores Kesselbach, while Weber was breaking into the villa. Single handed, he had arrested Altenheim's 7 companions. And he had delivered to justice the mysterious leader of the gang, the infamous monster, Louis de Malreich. A young man sat writing at a table on a wide wooden balcony. From time to time, he raised his head and cast a vague glance toward the horizon of hills, where the trees, stripped by the autumn, were shedding their last leaves over the red roofs of the villas and the lawns of the gardens. Then he went on writing. Presently, he took up his paper and read aloud: Nos jours s'en vont à la dérive, comme emportés par un courant qui les pousse vers une rive, où l'on n'aborde qu'en mourant. Our days go by, adrift, adrift, borne along by current swift that urges them toward the strand, where not until we die we land. Not so bad, said a voice behind him. Madame Amable Tastu might have written that, or Mrs. Felicia Hemans. However, we can't all be Byrons or Lamartines. You! Stammered the young man, in dismay. Yes, I, poet. I myself, Arsène Lupin, come to see his dear friend Pierre Leduc. Pierre Leduc began to shake, as though shivering with fear. He asked in a low voice: Has the hour come? Yes, my dear Pierre Leduc, the hour has come for you to give up, or rather to interrupt the slack poet's life which you have been leading for months at the feet of Geneviève Ernemont and Mrs. Kesselbach, and to perform the part which I have allotted to you in my play. Oh, a fine play, I assure you, thoroughly well constructed, according to all the canons of art, with top notes, comic relief and gnashing of teeth galore. We have reached the fifth act. The grand finale is at hand, and you, Pierre Leduc, are the hero. There's fame for you. The young man rose from his seat. And suppose I refuse? Idiot! Yes, suppose I refuse. After all, what obliges me to submit to your will? What obliges me to accept a part which I do not know, but which I loathe in advance and feel ashamed of? Idiot! Repeated Lupin. And forcing Pierre Leduc back into his chair, he sat down beside him and, in the gentlest of voices: You quite forget, my dear young man, that you are not Pierre Leduc, but Gérard Baupré. That you bear the beautiful name of Pierre Leduc is due to the fact that you, Gérard Baupré, killed Pierre Leduc and robbed him of his individuality. The young man bounded with indignation. You are mad! You know as well as I do that you conceived the whole plot. Yes, I know that, of course, but the law doesn't know it. And what will the law say when I come forward with proof that the real Pierre Leduc died a violent death and that you have taken his place? The young man, overwhelmed with consternation, stammered: No one will believe you. Why should I have done that? With what object? Idiot! The object is so self-evident that Weber himself could have perceived it. You lie when you say that you will not accept a part which you do not know. You know your part quite well. It is the part which Pierre Leduc would have played were he not dead. But Pierre Leduc, to me, to everybody, was only a name. Who was he? Who am I? What difference can that make to you? I want to know what I am doing. And if you know, will you go straight ahead? Yes, if the object of which you speak is worth it. If it were not, do you think I would take all this trouble? Who am I? Whatever my destiny, you may be sure that I shall prove worthy of it. But I want to know, who am I? Arsène Lupin took off his hat, bowed and said: Hermann IV, Grand Duke of Zweibrücken Veldenz, Prince of Berncastel, Elector of Treves and Lord of all sorts of places. 3 days later, Arsène Lupin took Mrs. Kesselbach away in a motor car in the direction of the frontier. The journey was accomplished in silence. Lupin remembered with emotion Dolores's terrified conduct and the words which he spoke in the house in the Rue des Vignes, when he was about to defend her against Altenheim's accomplices. And she must have remembered also, for she remained embarrassed and evidently perturbed in his presence. In the evening they reached a small castle, all covered with creepers and flowers, roofed with an enormous slate cap and standing in a large garden full of ancestral trees. Here Mrs. Kesselbach found Geneviève already installed, after a visit to the neighbouring town, where she had engaged a staff of servants from among the country people. "This will be your residence, madame," said Lupin. "You are at Bruggen Castle. You will be quite safe here, while waiting the outcome of these events. I have written to Pierre Leduc and he will be your guest from to-morrow." He started off again at once, drove to Veldenz and handed over to Count von Waldemar the famous letters which he had recaptured. "You know my conditions, my dear Waldemar," said Lupin. "The first and most important thing is to restore the house of Zweibrücken Veldenz and to reinstate the Grand Duke Hermann IV in the Grand Duchy. I shall open negotiations with the Council of Regency to day. According to my information, it will not be a difficult matter. But this Grand Duke Hermann? His Royal Highness is at present staying at Bruggen Castle, under the name of Pierre Leduc. I will supply all the necessary proofs of his identity." That same evening, Lupin took the road back to Paris, with the intention of actively hurrying on the trial of Malreich and the Seven Scoundrels. It would be wearisome to recapitulate the story of the case. The facts, down to the smallest details, are in the memory of one and all. It was one of those sensational events which still form a subject of conversation and discussion among the weather-beaten labourers in the remotest villages. But what I wish to recall is the enormous part played by Lupin in the conduct of the case and in the incidents appertaining to the preliminary inquiry. As a matter of fact, it was he who managed the inquiry. From the very start, he took the place of the authorities, ordering police searches, directing the measures to be taken, prescribing the questions to be put to the prisoners, assuming the responsibility for everything. We can all remember the universal amazement when, morning after morning, we read in the papers those letters, so irresistible in their masterly logic, signed, by turns, Arsène Lupin, examining magistrate; Arsène Lupin, public prosecutor; Arsène Lupin, minister of justice; Arsène Lupin, copper. He flung himself into the business with a spirit, an ardour, a violence even, that was astonishing in one usually so full of light-hearted chaff, and, when all was said, so naturally disposed by temperament to display a certain professional indulgence. No, this time he was prompted by hatred. He hated Louis de Malreich, that bloodthirsty scoundrel, that foul brute, of whom he had always been afraid, and who, even beaten, even in prison, still gave him that sensation of dread and repugnance which one feels at the sight of a reptile. Besides, had not Malreich had the audacity to persecute Dolores? "He has played and lost," said Lupin. "He shall pay for it with his head." That was what he wanted for his terrible enemy: the scaffold, the bleak, dull morning when the blade of the guillotine slides down and kills. It was a strange prisoner whom the examining magistrate questioned for months on end between the four walls of his room, a strange figure, that bony man, with the skeleton face and the lifeless eyes. He seemed quite out of himself. His thoughts were not there, but elsewhere. And he cared so little about answering. "My name is Leon Massier." That was the one sentence to which he confined himself. And Lupin retorted: "You lie! Leon Massier, born at Périgueux, left fatherless at the age of 10, died 7 years ago. You took his papers, but you forgot his death certificate. Here it is." And Lupin sent a copy of the document to the public prosecutor. "I am Leon Massier," declared the prisoner once again. "You lie!" replied Lupin. "You are Louis de Malreich, the last surviving descendant of a small French noble who settled in Germany in the 18th century. You had a brother who called himself Parbury, Ribera and Altenheim, by turns. You killed your brother. You had a sister, Isilda de Malreich. You killed your sister." "I am Leon Massier." "You lie! You are Malreich. Here is your birth certificate. Here are your brother's and your sister's." And Lupin sent the 3 certificates. Apart from the question of his identity, Malreich, crushed no doubt by the accumulation of proofs brought up against him, did not defend himself. What could he say? They had 40 notes written in his own hand, a comparison of the handwritings established the fact, written in his own hand to the gang of his accomplices, 40 notes which he had omitted to tear up after taking them back. All these notes were orders relating to the Kesselbach case, the capture of M. Lenormand and Gourel, the pursuit of old Steinweg, the construction of the underground passages at Garches, and so on. What possibility was there of a denial? One rather odd thing baffled the law officers. The 7 scoundrels, when confronted with their leader, all declared that they did not know him, because they had never seen him. They received his instructions either by telephone or else in the dark, by means of those same little notes which Malreich slipped into their hands without a word. But, for the rest, was not the existence of the communication between the villa in the Rue de Laizemont and the Broker's shed an ample proof of complicity? From that spot, Malreich saw and heard. From that spot, the leader watched his men. Discrepancies? Apparently irreconcilable facts? Lupin explained them all away. In a celebrated article, published on the morning of the trial, he took up the case from the start, revealed what lay beneath it, unravelled its web, showed Malreich, unknown to all, living in the room of his brother, the sham Major Parbury, passing unseen along the passages of the Palace Hotel and murdering Mr. Kesselbach, murdering Beudot, the floor-waiter, murdering Chapman, the secretary. The trial lingers in the memory. It was both terrifying and gloomy: terrifying because of the atmosphere of anguish that hung over the crowd of onlookers and the recollection of crime and blood that obsessed their minds; gloomy, heavy, darksome, stifling because of the tremendous silence observed by the prisoner. Not a protest, not a movement, not a word. A face of wax that neither saw nor heard. An awful vision of impassive calmness. The people in court shuddered. Their distraught imaginations conjured up a sort of supernatural being rather than a man, a sort of genie out of the Arabian Nights, one of those Hindu gods who symbolize all that is ferocious, cruel, sanguinary and pernicious. As for the other scoundrels, the people did not even look at them, treated them as insignificant supers overshadowed by that stupendous leader. The most sensational evidence was that given by Mrs. Kesselbach. To the general astonishment and to Lupin's own surprise, Dolores, who had answered none of the magistrate's summonses and who had retired to an unknown spot, Dolores appeared, a sorrow-stricken widow, to give damning evidence against her husband's murderer. She gazed at him for many seconds and then said simply: "That is the man who entered my house in the Rue des Vignes, who carried me off and who locked me up in the Broker's shed. I recognize him." "On your oath?" "I swear it before God and man." 2 days later, Louis de Malreich, alias Léon Massier, was sentenced to death. And his overpowering personality may be said to have absorbed that of his accomplices to such an extent that they received the benefit of extenuating circumstances. "Louis de Malreich, have you nothing to say?" asked the presiding judge. He made no reply. One question alone remained undecided in Lupin's eyes. Why had Malreich committed all those crimes? What did he want? What was his object? Lupin was soon to understand; and the day was not far off when, gasping with horror, struck, mortally smitten with despair, he would know the awful truth. For the moment, although the thought of it constantly hovered over his mind, he ceased to occupy himself with the Malreich case. Resolved to get a new skin, as he put it, reassured, on the other hand, as to the fate of Mrs. Kesselbach and Geneviève, over whose peaceful existence he watched from afar, and, lastly, kept informed by Jean Doudeville, whom he had sent to Veldenz, of all the negotiations that were being pursued between the Court of Berlin and the Regent of Zweibrucken Veldenz, he employed all his time in winding up the past and preparing for the future. The thought of the different life which he wished to lead under the eyes of Mrs. Kesselbach filled him with new ambitions and unexpected sentiments, in which the image of Dolores played a part, without his being able to tell exactly how or why. In a few weeks, he got rid of all the proofs that could have compromised him sooner or later, all the traces that could have led to his ruin. He gave each of his old companions a sum of money sufficient to keep them from want for the rest of their lives, and said good-bye to them, saying that he was going to South America. One morning, after a night of careful thought and a deep study of the situation, he cried: "It's done. There's nothing to fear now. The old Lupin is dead. Make way for the young one." His man brought him a telegram from Germany. It contained the news for which he had been waiting. The Council of Regency, greatly influenced by the Court of Berlin, had referred the question to the electors; and the electors, greatly influenced by the Council of Regency, had declared their unshaken attachment to the old dynasty of the Veldenz. Count von Waldemar was deputed, together with 3 delegates selected from the nobility, the army and the law, to go to Bruggen Castle, carefully to establish the identity of the Grand Duke Hermann IV, and to make all the arrangements with His Royal Highness for his triumphal entry into the principality of his fathers, which was to take place in the course of the following month. "This time I've pulled it off," said Lupin to himself. "Mr. Kesselbach's great scheme is being realized. All that remains for me to do is to make Waldemar swallow Pierre Leduc. And that is child's play. The banns between Geneviève and Pierre shall be published to morrow; and it shall be the Grand Duke's affianced bride that will be presented to Waldemar." Full of glee, he started in his motor for Bruggen Castle. He sang in the car, he whistled, he chatted to his chauffeur: "Octave, do you know whom you have the honour of driving? The master of the world. Yes, old man, that staggers you, eh? Just so, but it's the truth. I am the master of the world." He rubbed his hands and went on soliloquizing: "All the same, it was a long job. It's a year since the fight began. True, it was the most formidable fight I ever stood to win or lose. By Jupiter, what a war of giants!" And he repeated: "But this time I've pulled it off. The enemies are in the water. There are no obstacles left between the goal and me. The site is free. Let us build upon it. I have the materials at hand. I have the workmen. Let us build, Lupin, and let the palace be worthy of you." He stopped the car at a few hundred yards from the castle, so that his arrival might create as little fuss as possible, and said to Octave: Wait here for 20 minutes, until 4 o'clock, and then drive in. Take my bags to the little chalet at the end of the park. That's where I shall sleep." At the first turn of the road, the castle appeared in sight, standing at the end of a dark avenue of lime trees. From the distance, he saw Geneviève passing on the terrace. His heart was softly stirred. "Geneviève, Geneviève," he said fondly. "Geneviève, the vow which I made to the dying mother is being fulfilled as well. Geneviève, a grand duchess. And I, in the shade, watching over her happiness and pursuing the great schemes of Arsène Lupin." He burst out laughing, sprang behind a cluster of trees that stood to the left of the avenue and slipped along the thick shrubberies. In this way he reached the castle without the possibility of his being seen from the windows of the drawing-room or the principal bedrooms. He wanted to see Dolores before she saw him and pronounce her name several times, as he had pronounced Geneviève's, but with an emotion that surprised himself. Dolores, Dolores. He stole along the passages and reached the dining-room. From this room, through a glass panel, he could see half the drawing-room. He drew nearer. Dolores was lying on a couch, and Pierre Leduc, on his knees before her, was gazing at her with eyes of ecstasy. Chapter 15. Chapter 15 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice Leblanc. Chapter 15. The Map of Europe. Pierre Leduc loved Dolores. Lupin felt a keen, penetrating pain in the depths of his being, as though he had been wounded in the very source of life. A pain so great that, for the first time, he had a clear perception of what Dolores had gradually, unknown to himself, become to him. Pierre Leduc loved Dolores, and he was looking at her as a man looks at the woman he loves. Lupin felt a murderous instinct rise up within him, blindly and furiously. That look of love cast upon Dolores, maddened him. He received an impression of the great silence that enveloped Dolores and Pierre Leduc. And in silence, in the stillness of their attitude, there was nothing living but that look of love, that dumb and sensuous hymn, in which the eyes told all the passion, all the desire, all the transport, all the yearning that one being can feel for another. And he saw Mrs. Kesselbach also. Dolores's eyes were invisible under their lowered lids, the silky eyelids with the long black lashes. But how she seemed to feel that look of love which sought for hers! How she quivered under that impalpable caress! "She loves him! She loves him!" thought Lupin, burning with jealousy. And when Pierre made a movement: "Oh, the villain! If he dares to touch her, I will kill him!" Then, realizing the disorder of his reason and striving to combat it, he said to himself: "Oh, what a fool I am! What, you, Lupin, letting yourself go like this? Look here, it's only natural that she should love him. Yes, of course, you expected her to show a certain emotion at your arrival, a certain agitation. You silly idiot, you're only a thief, a robber, whereas he is a prince and young." Pierre had not stirred further. But his lips moved and it seemed as though Dolores were waking. Softly, slowly, she raised her lids, turned her head a little, and her eyes met the young man's eyes with the look that offers itself and surrenders itself and is more intense than the most intense of kisses. What followed came suddenly and unexpectedly, like a thunderclap. In 3 bounds, Lupin rushed into the drawing-room, sprang upon the young man, flung him to the ground and, with one hand on his rival's chest, beside himself with anger, turning to Mrs. Kesselbach, he cried: "But don't you know? Hasn't he told you, the cheat? And you love him? You love that? Does he look like a grand duke? Oh, what a joke!" He grinned and chuckled like a madman, while Dolores gazed at him in stupefaction. He, a grand duke, Hermann IV, Grand Duke of Zweibrucken and Veldenz, a reigning sovereign, Elector of Treves! But it's enough to make one die of laughing! He! Why, his name is Beaupré, Gérard Beaupré, the lowest of ragamuffins, a beggar whom I picked up in the gutter. A grand duke? But it's I who made him a grand duke. Ha, ha, ha! What a joke! If you had seen him cut his little finger! He fainted 3 times. The milksop! Ah, you allow yourself to lift your eyes to ladies and to rebel against the master. Wait a bit, Grand Duke of Zweibrucken Veldenz, I'll show you." He took him in his arms, like a bundle, swung him to and fro for a moment and pitched him through the open window. "Mind the rose trees, Grand Duke. There are thorns." When he turned round, Dolores was close to him and looking at him with eyes which he had never seen in her before: the eyes of a woman who hates and who is incensed with rage. Could this possibly be Dolores, the weak, ailing Dolores? She stammered: "What are you doing? How dare you? And he... Then it's true? Lied to me?" "Lied to you!" cried Lupin, grasping the humiliation which she had suffered as a woman. "Lied to you! He, a grand duke! A puppet, that's all, a puppet of which I pulled the string, an instrument which I tuned, to play upon as I chose. Oh, the fool, the fool!" Overcome with renewed rage, he stamped his foot and shook his fist at the open window. And he began to walk up and down the room, flinging out phrases in which all the pent-up violence of his secret thought burst forth. The fool! Then he didn't see what I expected of him? He did not suspect the greatness of the part he was to play? Oh, I shall have to drive it into his noddle by force, I see! Lift up your head, you idiot! You shall be grand duke by the grace of Lupin, and a reigning sovereign, with a civil list, and subjects to fleece, and a palace which Charlemagne shall rebuild for you, and a master that shall be I, Lupin. Do you understand, you numbskull? Lift up your head, dash it! Higher than that! Look up at the sky! Remember that a Zweibrucken was hanged for cattle lifting before the Hohenzollerns were ever heard of. And you are a Zweibrucken, by Jove, no less. And I am here, I, Lupin. And you shall be grand duke, I tell you. A pasteboard grand duke? Very well, but a grand duke all the same, quickened with my breath and glowing with my ardor. A puppet? Very well, but a puppet that shall speak my words and make my movements and perform my wishes and realize my dreams. Yes, my dreams. He stood motionless, as though dazzled by the glory of his conception. Then he went up to Dolores and, sinking his voice, with a sort of mystic exultation, he said: "On my left, Alsace-Lorraine; on my right, Baden, Würtemberg, Bavaria, South Germany, all those disconnected, discontented states crushed under the heel of the Prussian Charlemagne, but restless and ready to throw off the yoke at any moment. Do you understand all that a man like myself can do in the midst of that? All the aspirations that he can kindle, all the hatred that he can produce, all the angry rebellion that he can inspire?" In a still lower voice, he repeated: "And on my left, Alsace-Lorraine. Do you fully understand? Dreams? Not at all. It is the reality of the day after to morrow, of to morrow. Yes, I wish it, I wish it. Oh, all that I wish and all that I mean to do is unprecedented. Only think, at 2 steps from the Alsatian frontier, in the heart of German territory, close to the old Rhine, a little intrigue, a little genius will be enough to change the surface of the earth. Genius I have, and to spare, and I shall be the master. I shall be the man who directs. The other, the puppet, can have the title and the honours. I shall have the power. I shall remain in the background. No office. I will not be a minister, not even a chamberlain. Nothing. I shall be one of the servants in the palace, the gardener, perhaps. Yes, the gardener. Oh, what a tremendous life, to grow flowers and alter the map of Europe!" She looked at him greedily, dominated, swayed by the strength of that man; and her eyes expressed an admiration which she did not seek to conceal. He put his hands on Dolores' shoulders and said: "That is my dream. Great as it is, it will be surpassed by the facts. That I swear to you. The Kaiser has already seen what I am good for. One day he will find me installed in front of him, face to face. I hold all the trumps. Valenglay will act at my bidding. England also. The game is played and won. That is my dream. There is another one." He stopped suddenly. Dolores did not take her eyes from him; and an infinite emotion changed every feature of her face. A vast joy penetrated him as he once more felt, and clearly felt, that woman's confusion in his presence. He no longer had the sense of being to her what he was, a thief, a robber. He was a man who loved and whose love roused unspoken feelings in the depths of a friendly soul. Then he said no more, but he lavished upon her, unuttered, every known word of love and admiration, and he thought of the life which he might lead somewhere, not far from Veldenz, unknown and all-powerful. A long silence united them. Then she rose and said softly: "Go away. I entreat you to go. Pierre shall marry Geneviève. I promise you that. But it is better that you should go, that you should not be here. Go. Pierre shall marry Geneviève." He waited for a moment. Perhaps he would rather have had more definite words, but he dared not ask for anything. And he withdrew, dazed, intoxicated and happy to obey, to subject his destiny to hers. On his way to the door, he came upon a low chair which he had to move. But his foot knocked against something. He looked down. It was a little pocket mirror, in ebony, with a gold monogram. Suddenly, he started and snatched up the mirror. The monogram consisted of 2 letters interlaced, an L and an M. An L and an M! "Louis de Malreich," he said to himself, with a shudder. He turned to Dolores. "Where does this mirror come from? Whose is it? It is important that I should..." She took it from him and looked at it. "I don't know. I never saw it before. A servant, perhaps." "A servant, no doubt," he said, "but it is very odd. It is one of those coincidences." At that moment, Geneviève entered by the other door and, without seeing Lupin, who was hidden by a screen, at once exclaimed: "Why, there's your glass, Dolores! So you have found it, after making me hunt for it all this time! Where was it?" And the girl went away, saying: "Oh, well, I'm very glad it's found. How upset you were! I will go and tell them at once to stop looking for it." Lupin had not moved. He was confused and tried in vain to understand. Why had Dolores not spoken the truth? Why had she not at once said whose the mirror was? An idea flashed across his mind and he asked, more or less at random: "Do you know Louis de Malreich?" "Yes," she said, watching him, as though striving to guess the thoughts that beset him. He rushed toward her, in a state of intense excitement: "You know him? Who was he? Who is he? Who is he? And why did you not tell me? Where have you known him? Speak! Answer, I implore you!" "No," she said. "But you must, you must! Think, Louis de Malreich, the murderer, the monster! Why did you not tell me?" She in turn placed her hands on Lupin's shoulders and, in a firm voice, declared: "Listen, you must never ask me, because I shall never tell. It is a secret which I shall take with me to the grave. Come what may, no one will ever know, no one in the wide world, I swear it." He stood before her for some minutes, anxiously, with a confused brain. He remembered Steinweg's silence and the old man's terror when Lupin asked him to reveal the terrible secret. Dolores also knew and she also refused to speak. He went out without a word. The open air, the sense of space, did him good. He passed out through the park wall and wandered long over the country. And he soliloquized aloud: "What does it mean? What is happening? For months and months, fighting hard and acting, I have been pulling the strings of all the characters that are to help me in the execution of my plans. And, during this time, I have completely forgotten to stoop over them and see what is going on in their hearts and brains. I do not know Pierre Leduc, I do not know Geneviève, I do not know Dolores; and I have treated them as so many jumping jacks, whereas they are live persons. And to-day I am stumbling over obstacles." He stamped his foot and cried: "Over obstacles that do not exist! What do I care for the psychological state of Geneviève, of Pierre? I will study that later, at Veldenz, when I have secured their happiness. But Dolores! She knew Malreich and said nothing. Why? What relation united them? Was she afraid of him? Is she afraid that he will escape from prison and come to revenge himself for an indiscretion on her part?" At night he went to the chalet which he had allotted to his own use at the end of the park and dined in a very bad temper, storming at Octave, who waited on him and who was always either too slow or too fast. "I'm sick of it. Leave me alone. You're doing everything wrong to day. And this coffee, it's not fit to drink." He pushed back his cup half full and, for 2 hours, walked about the park, sifting the same ideas over and over again. At last, one suggestion took definite shape within his mind. "Malreich has escaped from prison. He is terrifying Mrs. Kesselbach. By this time, he already knows the story of the mirror from her." Lupin shrugged his shoulders: "And to-night he's coming to pull my leg, I suppose? I'm talking nonsense. The best thing I can do is to go to bed." He went to his room, undressed and got into bed. He fell asleep at once, with a heavy sleep disturbed by nightmares. Twice he woke and tried to light his candle and twice fell back, as though stunned by a blow. Nevertheless, he heard the hours strike on the village clock, or rather he thought that he heard them strike, for he was plunged in a sort of torpor in which he seemed to retain all his wits. And he was haunted by dreams, dreams of anguish and terror. He plainly heard the sound of his window opening. He plainly, through his closed eyelids, through the thick darkness, saw a form come toward the bed. And the form bent over him. He made the incredible effort needed to raise his eyelids and look, or at least he imagined that he did. Was he dreaming? Was he awake? He asked himself the question in despair. A further sound. He took up the box of matches by his bedside. "Let's have a light on it," he said, with a great sense of elation. He struck a match and lit the candle. Lupin felt the perspiration stream over his skin from head to foot, while his heart ceased beating, stopped with terror. The man was there. Was it possible? No, no. And yet he saw. Oh, the fearsome sight! The man, the monster, was there. He shall not, stammered Lupin madly. The man, the monster was there, dressed in black, with a mask on his face and with his felt hat pulled down over his fair hair. "Oh, I am dreaming," said Lupin, laughing. "It's a nightmare." Exerting all his strength and all his will power, he tried to make a movement, one movement, to drive away the vision. He could not. And suddenly he remembered: the coffee, the taste of it, similar to the taste of the coffee which he had drunk at Veldenz. He gave a cry, made a last effort and fell back exhausted. But in his delirium he felt that the man was unfastening the top button of his pyjama jacket and baring his neck, felt that the man was raising his arm, saw that the hand was clutching the handle of a dagger, a little steel dagger, similar to that which had struck Kesselbach, Chapman, Altenheim and so many others. A few hours later, Lupin woke up, shattered with fatigue, with a scorched palate. He lay for several minutes collecting his thoughts and, suddenly remembering, made an instinctive defensive movement, as though he were being attacked. "Fool that I am!" he cried, jumping out of bed. "It was a nightmare, a hallucination. It only needs a little reflection. Had it been he, had it really been a man, in flesh and blood, who lifted his hand against me last night, he would have cut my throat like a rabbit's. He doesn't hesitate. Let's be logical. Why should he spare me? For the sake of my good looks? No, I've been dreaming, that's all." He began to whistle and dressed himself, assuming the greatest calmness, but his brain never ceased working and his eyes sought about. On the floor, on the window ledge, not a trace. As his room was on the ground floor and as he slept with his window open, it was evident that his assailant would have entered that way. Well, he discovered nothing, and nothing either at the foot of the wall outside or on the gravel of the path that ran round the chalet. Still, he repeated, between his teeth. He called Octave: "Where did you make the coffee which you gave me last night?" "At the castle, governor, like the rest of the things. There is no range here." "Did you drink any of it?" "No." "Did you throw away what was left in the coffee pot?" "Why, yes, governor. You said it was so bad. You only took a few mouthfuls." "Very well. Get the motor ready. We're leaving." Lupin was not the man to remain in doubt. He wanted to have a decisive explanation with Dolores. But for this he must first clear up certain points that seemed to him obscure and see Jean Doudeville, who had sent him some rather curious information from Veldenz. He drove, without stopping, to the Grand Duchy, which he reached at 2 o'clock. He had an interview with Count de Waldemar, whom he asked, upon some pretext, to delay the journey of the delegates of the Regency to Bruggen. He then went in search of Doudeville, in a tavern at Veldenz. Doudeville took him to another tavern, where he introduced him to a shabbily dressed little gentleman, Herr Stockli, a clerk in the department of births, deaths and marriages. They had a long conversation. They went out together and all three passed stealthily through the offices of the town hall. At 7 o'clock, Lupin dined and set out again. At 10 o'clock he arrived at Bruggen Castle and asked for Geneviève, so that she might take him to Mrs. Kesselbach's room. He was told that Mlle. Ernemont had been summoned back to Paris by a telegram from her grandmother. "Ah," he said, "could I see Mrs. Kesselbach?" "Mrs. Kesselbach went straight to bed after dinner. She is sure to be asleep." "No, I saw a light in her boudoir. She will see me." He did not even wait for Mrs. Kesselbach to send out an answer. He walked into the boudoir almost upon the maid's heels, dismissed her and said to Dolores: "I have to speak to you, madame, on an urgent matter. Forgive me. I confess that my behaviour must seem importunate. But you will understand, I am sure." He was greatly excited and did not seem much disposed to put off the explanation, especially as, before entering the room, he thought he heard a sound. Yet Dolores was alone and lying down; and she said, in her tired voice: "Perhaps we might ... to morrow." He did not answer, suddenly struck by a smell that surprised him in that boudoir, a smell of tobacco. And, at once, he had the intuition, the certainty, that there was a man there, at the moment when he himself arrived, and that perhaps the man was there still, hidden somewhere. Pierre Leduc? No, Pierre Leduc did not smoke. Then who? Dolores murmured: "Be quick, please." "Yes, yes, but first, would it be possible for you to tell me...." He interrupted himself. What was the use of asking her? If there were really a man in hiding, would she be likely to tell? Then he made up his mind; and, trying to overcome the sort of timid constraint that oppressed him at the sense of a strange presence, he said, in a very low voice, so that Dolores alone should hear: "Listen. I have learnt something, which I do not understand and which perplexes me greatly. You will answer me, will you not, Dolores?" He spoke her name with great gentleness and as though he were trying to master her by the note of love and affection in his voice. "What have you learnt?" she asked. "The register of births at Veldenz contains 3 names which are those of the last descendants of the family of Malreich which settled in Germany." "Yes, you have told me all that." "You remember, the first name is Raoul de Malreich, better known under his alias of Altenheim, the scoundrel, the swell hooligan, now dead, murdered." "Yes." "Next comes Louis de Malreich, the monster, this one, the terrible murderer who will be beheaded in a few days from now." "Yes." "Then, lastly, Isilda, the mad daughter." "Yes." "So all that is quite positive, is it not?" "Yes." "Well," said Lupin, leaning over her more closely than before, "I have just made an investigation which showed to me that the second of the 3 Christian names, or rather a part of the line on which it is written, has at some point or other been subjected to erasure. The line is written over in a new hand, with much fresher ink, but the writing below is not quite effaced, so that..." "So that?" asked Mrs. Kesselbach, in a low voice. "So that, with a good lens, and particularly with the special methods which I have at my disposal, I was able to revive some of the obliterated syllables and, without any possibility of a mistake, in all certainty, to reconstruct the old writing. I then found not Louis de Malreich, but..." "Oh, don't! Don't!" Suddenly shattered by the strain of her prolonged effort of resistance, she lay bent in two and, with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaken with convulsive sobs, she wept. Lupin looked for long seconds at this weak and listless creature, so pitifully helpless. And he would have liked to stop, to cease the torturing questions which he was inflicting upon her. But was it not to save her that he was acting as he did? And, to save her, was it not necessary that he should know the truth, however painful? He resumed: "Why that forgery?" It was my husband," she stammered. "It was my husband who did it. With his fortune, he could do everything; and he bribed a junior clerk to have the Christian name of the second child altered for him on the register." "The Christian name and the sex," said Lupin. "Yes," she said. "Then," he continued, "I am not mistaken. The original Christian name, the real one, was Dolores." "Yes." "But why did your husband...." She whispered, in a shamefaced manner, while the tears streamed down her cheeks: "Don't you understand?" "No." "But think," she said, shuddering. "I was the sister of Isilda, the madwoman, the sister of Altenheim, the ruffian. My husband, or rather my affianced husband, would not have me remain that. He loved me. I loved him too and I consented. He suppressed Dolores de Malreich on the register. He bought me other papers, another personality, another birth certificate; and I was married in Holland under another maiden name, as Dolores Amonti." Lupin reflected for a moment and said, thoughtfully: "Yes, yes, I understand. But then Louis de Malreich does not exist; and the murderer of your husband, the murderer of your brother and sister, does not bear that name. His name?" She sprang to a sitting posture and, eagerly: "His name! Yes, that is his name. Yes, it is his name, nevertheless. Louis de Malreich, L.M., remember? Oh, do not try to find out! It is the terrible secret. Besides, what does it matter? They have the criminal. He is the criminal. I tell you he is. Did he defend himself when I accused him, face to face? Could he defend himself, under that name or any other? It is he! It is he! He committed the murders! He struck the blows, the dagger, the steel dagger! Oh, if I could only tell all I know! Louis de Malreich, if I could only..." She fell back on the sofa in a fit of hysterical sobbing; and her hand clutched Lupin's, and he heard her stammering, amid inarticulate words: "Protect me! Protect me! You alone, perhaps. Oh, do not forsake me! I am so unhappy! Oh, what torture! What torture! It is hell!" With his free hand, he stroked her hair and forehead with infinite gentleness; and, under his caress, she gradually relaxed her tense nerves and became calmer and quieter. Then he looked at her again and long asked himself what there could be behind that fair white brow, what secret was ravaging that mysterious soul. She also was afraid. But of whom? Against whom was she imploring him to protect her? Once again he was obsessed by the image of the man in black, by that Louis de Malreich, the sinister and incomprehensible enemy, whose attacks he had to ward off without knowing whence they came, or even if they were taking place. He was in prison, watched day and night. Tut! Did Lupin not know by his own experience that there are beings for whom prison does not exist and who throw off their chains at the given moment? And Louis de Malreich was one of those. Yes, there was some one in the Santé prison, in the condemned man's cell; but it might be an accomplice or some victim of Malreich, while Malreich himself prowled around Bruggen Castle, slipped in under cover of the darkness, like an invisible spectre, made his way into the chalet in the park and, at night, raised his dagger against Lupin, asleep and helpless. And it was Louis de Malreich who terrorized Dolores, who drove her mad with his threats, who held her by some dreadful secret and forced her into silence and submission. And Lupin imagined the enemy's plan: to throw Dolores, scared and trembling, into Pierre Leduc's arms, to make away with him, Lupin, and to reign in his place, over there, with the grand duke's power and Dolores's millions. It was a likely supposition, a certain supposition, which fitted in with the facts and provided a solution of all the problems. Of all? thought Lupin. Yes, but then, why did he not kill me last night, in the chalet? He had but to wish. And he did not wish. One movement and I was dead. He did not make that movement. Why? Dolores opened her eyes, saw him and smiled, with a pale smile. "Leave me," she said. He rose with some hesitation. Should he go and see if the enemy was behind the curtain or hidden behind the dresses in a cupboard? She repeated, gently: "Go. I am so sleepy." He went away. But, outside, he stopped behind some trees that formed a dark cluster in front of the castle. He saw a light in Dolores's boudoir. Then the light passed into the bedroom. In a few minutes, all was darkness. He waited. If the enemy was there, perhaps he would come out of the castle. An hour elapsed. 2 hours. Not a sound. "There's nothing to be done," thought Lupin. "Either he is burrowing in some corner of the castle, or else he has gone out by a door which I cannot see from here. Unless the whole thing is the most ridiculous supposition on my part." He lit a cigarette and walked back to the chalet. As he approached it, he saw at some distance from him a shadow that appeared to be moving away. He did not stir, for fear of giving the alarm. The shadow crossed a path. By the light of the moon, he seemed to recognize the black figure of Malreich. He rushed forward. The shadow fled and vanished from sight. "Come," he said, "it shall be for to morrow. And this time...." Lupin went to Octave's, his chauffeur's room, woke him and said: "Take the motor and go to Paris. You will be there by 6 o'clock in the morning. See Jacques Doudeville and tell him 2 things: first, to give me news of the man under sentence of death; and secondly, as soon as the post office is open, to send me a telegram which I will write down for you now." He worded the telegram on a scrap of paper and added: "The moment you have done that, come back, but this way, along the wall of the park. Go now. No one must suspect your absence." Lupin went to his own room, pressed the spring of his lantern and began to make a minute inspection. "It's as I thought," he said, presently. "Some one came here to night, while I was watching beneath the window. And, if he came, I know what he came for. I was certainly right. Things are getting warm. The first time, I was spared. This time, I may be sure of my little stab." For prudence's sake, he took a blanket, chose a lonely spot in the park and spent the night under the stars. Octave was back by 10 o'clock in the morning. "It's all right, governor. The telegram has been sent." "Good. And is Louis de Malreich still in prison?" "Yes. Doudeville passed his cell at the Santé last night as the warder was coming out. They talked together. Malreich is just the same, it appears. Silent as the grave. He is waiting." "Waiting for what?" "The fatal hour, of course. They are saying, at headquarters, that the execution will take place on the day after to morrow." "That's all right, that's all right," said Lupin. "And one thing is quite plain: he has not escaped." He ceased to understand or even to look for the explanation of the riddle, so clearly did he feel that the whole truth would soon be revealed to him. He had only to prepare his plan, for the enemy to fall into the trap. "Or for me to fall into it myself," he thought, laughing. He felt very gay, very free from care; and no fight had ever looked more promising to him. A footman came from the castle with the telegram which he had told Doudeville to send him and which the postman had just brought. He opened it and put it in his pocket. A little before 12 o'clock he met Pierre Leduc in one of the avenues and said, offhand: "I am looking for you. Things are serious. You must answer me frankly. Since you have been at the castle, have you ever seen a man there, besides the 2 German servants whom I sent in?" "No." "Think carefully. I am not referring to a casual visitor. I mean a man who hides himself, a man whose presence you might have discovered or, less than that, whose presence you might have suspected from some clue or even by some intuition." "No. Have you?" "Yes, some one is hiding there, some one is prowling about. Where? And who is it? And what is his object? I don't know. But I shall know. I already have a suspicion. Do you, on your side, keep your eyes open and watch. And, above all, not a word to Mrs. Kesselbach. It is no use alarming her." He went away. Pierre Leduc, taken aback and upset, went back to the castle. On his way, he saw a piece of blue paper on the edge of the lawn. He picked it up. It was a telegram, not crumpled, like a piece of paper that had been thrown away, but carefully folded, obviously lost. It was addressed to Beauny, the name by which Lupin was known at Bruggen, and it contained these words: "We know the whole truth. Revelations impossible by letter. Will take train to night. Meet me 8 o'clock to morrow morning, Bruggen station." "Excellent!" said Lupin, who was watching Pierre Leduc's movements from a neighbouring coppice. "Excellent! In 2 minutes from now, the young idiot will have shown Dolores the telegram and told her all my fears. They will talk about it all day. And the other one will hear, the other one will know, because he knows everything, because he lives in Dolores's own shadow and because Dolores is like a fascinated prey in his hands. And to night..." He walked away, humming to himself: "To night we shall dance. Such a waltz, my boys, the waltz of blood, to the tune of the little nickel-plated dagger. We shall have some fun at last." He reached the chalet, called to Octave, went to his room, flung himself on his bed and said to the chauffeur: "Sit down in that chair, Octave, and keep awake. Your master is going to take 40 winks. Watch over him, you faithful servant." He had a good sleep. "Like Napoleon on the morning of Austerlitz," he said, when he woke up. It was dinner time. He made a hearty meal and then, while he smoked a cigarette, inspected his weapons and renewed the charges of his 2 revolvers. "Keep your powder dry and your sword sharpened, as my chum the Kaiser says. Octave?" Octave appeared. "Go and have your dinner at the castle, with the servants. Tell them you are going to Paris to night, in the motor." "With you, governor?" "No, alone. And, as soon as dinner is over, make a start, ostensibly." "But I am not to go to Paris?" "No, remain outside the park, half a mile down the road, until I come. You will have a long wait." He smoked another cigarette, went for a stroll, passed in front of the castle, saw a light in Dolores's rooms, and then returned to the chalet. There he took up a book. It was the Lives of Illustrious Men. "There is one missing, the most illustrious of all. But the future will put that right. And I shall have my Plutarch some day or other." He read the Life of Caesar and jotted down a few reflections in the margin. At 11:30 he went to his bedroom. Through the open window he gazed into the immense, cool night, all astir with indistinct sounds. Memories rose to his lips, memories of fond phrases which he had read or uttered; and he repeatedly whispered Dolores's name, with the fervour of a stripling who hardly dares confide to the silence the name of his beloved. He left the window half open, pushed aside a table that blocked the way, and put his revolvers under his pillow. Then, peacefully, without evincing the least excitement, he got into bed, fully dressed as he was, and blew out the candle. And his fear began. It was immediate. No sooner did he feel the darkness around him than his fear began. "Damn it all!" he cried. He jumped out of bed, took his weapons and threw them into the passage. My hands alone! Nothing comes up to the grip of my hands. He went to bed again. Darkness and silence once more. And once more his fear. The village clock struck 12. Lupin thought of the foul monster who, outside, at 100 yards, at 50 yards, from where he lay, was trying the sharp point of his dagger. "Let him come? Let him come?" whispered Lupin, shuddering. "Then the ghosts will vanish." 1 o'clock in the village. And minutes passed, endless minutes, minutes of fever and anguish. Beads of perspiration stood at the roots of his hair and trickled down his forehead, and he felt as though his whole frame were bathed in the sweat of blood. 2 o'clock. And now, somewhere, quite close, a hardly perceptible sound stirred, a sound of leaves moving, but different from the sound of leaves moving in the night breeze. As Lupin had foreseen, he was at once pervaded by an immense calm. All his adventurous being quivered with delight. The struggle was at hand, at last! Another sound grated under the window, more plainly this time, but still so faint that it needed Lupin's trained ear to distinguish it. Minutes. Terrifying minutes. The darkness was impenetrable. No light of star or moon relieved it. And suddenly, without hearing anything, he knew that the man was in the room. And the man walked toward the bed. He walked as a ghost walks, without displacing the air of the room, without shaking the objects which he touched. But with all his instinct, with all his nervous force, Lupin saw the movements of the enemy and guessed the very sequence of his ideas. He himself did not budge, but remained propped against the wall, almost on his knees, ready to spring. He felt that the figure was touching, feeling the bedclothes, to find the spot at which it must strike. Lupin heard its breath. He even thought that he heard the beating of its heart. And he noticed with pride that his own heart beat no louder than before, whereas the heart of the other... Oh, yes, he could hear it now, that disordered, mad heart, knocking, like a clapper of a bell, against the cavity of the chest. The hand of the other rose. A second. 2 seconds. Was he hesitating? Was he once more going to spare his adversary? And Lupin, in the great silence, said: "But strike! Why don't you strike?" A yell of rage. The arm fell as though moved by a spring. Then came a moan. Lupin had caught the arm in mid air at the level of the wrist; and, leaping out of bed, tremendous, irresistible, he clutched the man by the throat and threw him. That was all. There was no struggle. There was no possibility even of a struggle. The man lay on the floor, nailed, pinned by 2 steel rivets, which were Lupin's hands. And there was not a man in the world strong enough to release himself from that grip. And not a word. Lupin uttered none of those phrases in which his mocking humour usually delighted. He had no inclination to speak. The moment was too solemn. He felt no vain glee, no victorious exultation. In reality, he had but one longing: to know who was there. Louis de Malreich, the man sentenced to death? Or another? Which was it? At the risk of strangling the man, he squeezed the throat a little more, and a little more, and a little more still. And he felt that all the enemy's strength, all the strength that remained to him, was leaving him. The muscles of the arm relaxed and became lifeless. The hand opened and dropped the dagger. Then, free to move as he pleased, with his adversary's life hanging in the terrible clutch of his fingers, he took his pocket lantern with one hand, laid his finger on the spring, without pressing, and brought it close to the man's face. He had only to press the spring to wish to know, and he would know. For a second, he enjoyed his power. A flood of emotion upheaved him. The vision of his triumph dazzled him. Once again, superbly, heroically, he was the master. He switched on the light. The face of the monster came into view. Lupin gave a shriek of terror. Dolores Kesselbach. Chapter 15. Chapter 16 of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice LEBLANC. Chapter 16. Arsène Lupin's 3 murders. A cyclone passed through Lupin's brain, a hurricane in which roars of thunder, gusts of wind, squalls of all the distraught elements were tumultuously unchained in the chaotic night. And great flashes of lightning shot through the darkness. And by the dazzling gleam of those lightning flashes, Lupin, scared, shaken with thrills, convulsed with horror, saw and tried to understand. He did not move, clinging to the enemy's throat, as if his stiffened fingers were no longer able to release their grip. Besides, although he now knew, he had not, so to speak, the exact feeling that it was Dolores. It was still the man in black, Louis de Malreich, the foul brute of the darkness; and that brute he held and did not mean to let go. But the truth rushed upon the attack of his mind and of his consciousness; and conquered, tortured with anguish, he muttered: "Oh, Dolores, Dolores!" He at once saw the excuse. It was madness. She was mad, the sister of Altenheim and Isilda, the daughter of the last of the Malreichs, of the demented mother, of the drunken father, was herself mad. A strange mad woman, mad with every appearance of sanity, but mad nevertheless, unbalanced, brain-sick, unnatural, truly monstrous. That he most certainly understood. It was homicidal madness. Under the obsession of an object toward which he was drawn automatically, she killed, thirsting for blood, unconsciously, infernally. She killed because she wanted something. She killed in self-defense. She killed because she had killed before. But she killed also and especially for the sake of killing. Murder satisfied sudden and irresistible appetites that arose in her. At certain seconds in her life, in certain circumstances, face to face with this or that being who had suddenly become the foe, her arm had to strike. And she struck, drunk with rage, ferociously, frenziedly. A strange madwoman, not answerable for her murders, and yet so lucid in her blindness, so logical in her mental derangement, so intelligent in her absurdity. What skill, what perseverance, what cunning contrivances! At once abominable and admirable. And Lupin, in a rapid view, with prodigious keenness of outlook, saw the long array of bloodthirsty adventures and guessed the mysterious paths which Dolores had pursued. He saw her obsessed and possessed by her husband's scheme, a scheme which she evidently understood only in part. He saw her, on her side, looking for that same Pierre Leduc whom her husband was seeking, looking for him in order to marry him and to return, as queen, to that little realm of Veldenz from which her parents had been ignominiously driven. And he saw her at the Palace Hotel, in the room of her brother Altenheim, at the time when she was supposed to be at Monte Carlo. He saw her, for days together, spying upon her husband, creeping along the walls, one with the darkness, undistinguishable and unseen in her shadowy disguise. And one night she found Mr. Kesselbach fastened up, and she stabbed him. And in the morning, when on the point of being denounced by the floor-waiter, she stabbed him. And an hour later, when on the point of being denounced by Chapman, she dragged him to her brother's room and stabbed him. All this pitilessly, savagely, with diabolical skill. And with the same skill, she communicated by telephone with her 2 maids, Gertrude and Suzanne, both of whom had arrived from Monte Carlo, where one of them had enacted the part of her mistress. And Dolores, resuming her feminine attire, discarding the fair wig that altered her appearance beyond recognition, went down to the ground floor, joined Gertrude at the moment when the maid entered the hotel and pretended herself to have just arrived, all ignorant of the tragedy that awaited her. An incomparable actress, she played the part of the wife whose life is shattered. Every one pitied her. Every one wept for her. Who could have suspected her? And then came the war with him, Lupin, that barbarous contest, that unparalleled contest which she waged, by turns, against M. Lenormand and Prince Sernine, spending her days stretched on her sofa, ill and fainting, but her nights on foot, scouring the roads indefatigable and terrible. And the diabolical contrivances: Gertrude and Suzanne, frightened and subdued accomplices, both of them serving her as emissaries, disguising themselves to represent her, perhaps, as on the day when old Steinweg was carried off by Baron Altenheim in the middle of the Palais de Justice. And the series of murders: Gourel drowned, Altenheim, her brother, stabbed. Oh, the implacable struggle in the underground passages of the Villa des Glycines, the invisible work performed by the monster in the dark! How clear it all appeared to day! And it was she who tore off his mask as Prince Sernine, she who betrayed him to the police, she who sent him to prison, she who thwarted all his plans, spending her millions to win the battle. And then events followed faster. Suzanne and Gertrude disappeared, dead, no doubt. Steinweg assassinated. Isilda, the sister, assassinated. Oh, the ignominy, the horror of it! Stammered Lupin, with a start of revulsion and hatred. He execrated her, the abominable creature. He would have liked to crush her, to destroy her. And it was a stupefying sight, those two beings, clinging to each other, lying motionless in the pale dawn that began to mingle with the shades of the night. "Dolores, Dolores," he muttered, in despair. He leapt back, terror-stricken, wild-eyed. What was it? What was that? What was that hideous feeling of cold which froze his hands? "Octave! Octave!" he shouted, forgetting that the chauffeur was not there. Help! He needed help, some one to reassure him and assist him. He shivered with fright. Oh, that coldness of death which he had felt! Was it possible? Then, during those few tragic minutes, with his clenched fingers, he had... Violently, he forced himself to look. Dolores did not stir. He flung himself on his knees and drew her to him. She was dead. He remained for some seconds a prey to a sort of numbness in which his grief seemed to be swallowed up. He no longer suffered. He no longer felt rage, nor hatred, nor emotion of any kind. Nothing but a stupid prostration, the sensation of a man who has received a blow with a club and who does not know if he is still alive, if he is thinking, or if he is the sport of a nightmare. Nevertheless, it seemed to him that an act of justice had taken place, and it did not for a second occur to him that it was he who had taken life. No, it was not he. It was outside him and his will. It was destiny, inexorable destiny, that had accomplished the work of equity by slaying the noxious beast. Outside, the birds were singing. Life was recommencing under the old trees, which the spring was preparing to bring into bud. And Lupin, waking from his torpor, felt gradually welling up within him an indefinable and ridiculous compassion for the wretched woman, odious, certainly, abject and 20 times criminal, but so young still, and now dead. And he thought of the tortures which she must have undergone in her lucid moments, when reason returned to the unspeakable madwoman and brought the sinister vision of her deeds. "Protect me. I am so unhappy," she used to beg. It was against herself that she asked to be protected, against her wild beast instincts, against the monster that dwelt within her and forced her to kill, always to kill. Always? Lupin asked himself. And he remembered the night, 2 days since, when, standing over him, with her dagger raised against the enemy who had been harassing her for months, against the indefatigable enemy who had run her to earth after each of her crimes, he remembered that on that night she had not killed. And yet it would have been easy. The enemy lay lifeless and powerless. One blow and the implacable struggle was over. No, she had not killed. She too had given way to feelings stronger than her own cruelty, to mysterious feelings of pity, of sympathy, of admiration for the man who had so often mastered her. No, she had not killed, that time. And now, by a really terrifying vicissitude of fate, it was he who had killed her. "I have taken life," he thought, shuddering from head to foot. "These hands have killed a living being. And that creature is Dolores. 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 He never ceased repeating her name of sorrow, and he never ceased staring at her, a sad, lifeless thing, harmless now, a poor hunk of flesh, with no more consciousness than a little heap of withered leaves, or a little dead bird by the roadside. Oh, how could he do other than quiver with compassion, seeing that of those two, face to face, he was the murderer, and she, who was no more, the victim? Dolores! 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 The daylight found Lupin seated beside the dead woman, remembering and thinking, while his lips, from time to time, uttered the disconsolate syllables: Dolores. Dolores. He had to act, however, and, in the disorder of his ideas, he did not know how to act, nor with what act to begin. "I must close her eyes first," he said. The eyes, all empty, filled only with death, those beautiful, gold-spangled eyes, had still the melancholy softness that gave them their charm. Was it possible that those eyes were the eyes of a monster? In spite of himself and in the face of the implacable reality, Lupin was not yet able to blend into one single being those two creatures whose images remained so distinct at the back of his brain. He stooped swiftly, lowered the long, silky eyelids, and covered the poor distorted face with a veil. Then it seemed to him that Dolores was farther away and that the man in black was really there, this time, in his dark clothes, in his murderer's disguise. He now ventured to touch her, to feel in her clothes. In an inside pocket there were 2 pocket-books. He took one of them and opened it. He found first a letter signed by Steinweg, the old German. It contained the following lines: "Should I die before being able to reveal the terrible secret, let it be known that the murderer of my friend Kesselbach, whose real name is Dolores de Malreich, sister to Altenheim and sister to Isilda. The initials L and M relate to her. Kesselbach never, in their private life, called his wife Dolores, which is the name of sorrow, but Letitia, which denotes joy. L.M. Letitia de Malreich were the initials inscribed on all the presents which he used to give her, for instance, on the cigarette case which was found at the Palace Hotel and which belonged to Mrs. Kesselbach. She had contracted the smoking habit on her travels. Letitia! She was indeed the joy of his life for 4 years, 4 years of lies and hypocrisy in which she prepared the death of the man who loved her so well and who trusted her so whole-heartedly. Perhaps I ought to have spoken at once. I had not the courage, in memory of my old friend Kesselbach, whose name she bore. And then I was afraid. On the day when I unmasked her, at the Palais de Justice, I read my doom in her eyes. Will my weakness save me? Him also, thought Lupin. Him also she killed. Why, of course, he knew too much. The initials, that name, Letitia, the secret habit of smoking. And he remembered the previous night, that smell of tobacco in her room. He continued his inspection of the first pocket-book. There were scraps of letters in cipher, no doubt handed to Dolores by her accomplices in the course of their nocturnal meetings. There were also addresses on bits of paper, addresses of milliners and dressmakers, but addresses also of low haunts, of common hotels, and names, 20, 30 names, queer names: Hector the butcher, Armand of Grenelle, the sick man. But a photograph caught Lupin's eye. He looked at it and, at once, as though shot from a spring, dropping the pocket-book, he bolted out of the room, out of the chalet, and rushed into the park. He had recognized the portrait of Louis de Malreich, the prisoner at the Santé. Not till then, not till that exact moment, did he remember. The execution was to take place next day. And, as the man in black, as the murderer was none other than Dolores Kesselbach, Louis de Malreich's name was really and truly Léon Massier, and he was innocent. Innocent? But the evidence found in his house, the Emperor's letters, all the things that accused him beyond hope of denial, all those incontrovertible proofs. Lupin stopped for a second, with his brain on fire. "Oh," he cried, "I shall go mad, I too! Come, now, I must act. The sentence is to be executed. To-morrow at break of day." He looked at his watch. 10 o'clock. How long will it take me to reach Paris? Well, I shall be there presently. Yes, presently, I must. And this very evening I shall take measures to prevent... But what measures? How can I prove his innocence? How prevent the execution? Oh, never mind. Once I am there, I shall find a way. My name is not Lupin for nothing. Come on. He set off again at a run, entered the castle and called out: "Pierre! Pierre! Has any one seen Monsieur Pierre Leduc? Oh, there you are! Listen." He took him on one side and jerked out, in imperious tones: "Listen, Dolores is not here. Yes, she was called away on urgent business. She left last night in my motor. I am going too. Don't interrupt, not a word. A second lost means irreparable harm. You, send away all the servants, without any explanation. Here is money. In half an hour from now, the castle must be empty. And let no one enter it until I return. Not you either, do you understand? I forbid you to enter the castle. I'll explain later. Serious reasons. Here, take the key with you. Wait for me in the village." And once more he darted away. 5 minutes later, he was with Octave. He jumped into the car. Paris! The journey was a real race for life or death. Lupin, thinking that Octave was not driving fast enough, took the steering wheel himself and drove at a furious break-neck speed. On the road, through the villages, along the crowded streets of the towns, they rushed at 60 miles an hour. People whom they nearly upset roared and yelled with rage. The meteor was far away, was out of sight. "Governor," stammered Octave, livid with dismay, "we shall be stuck." "You, perhaps, the motor, perhaps, but I shall arrive," said Lupin. He had a feeling as though it were not the car that was carrying him, but he carrying the car, and as though he were cleaving space by dint of his own strength, his own will power. Then what miracle could prevent his arriving, seeing that his strength was inexhaustible, his will power unbounded? "I shall arrive because I have got to arrive," he repeated. And he thought of the man who would die, if he did not arrive in time to save him, of the mysterious Louis de Malreich, so disconcerting with his stubborn silence and his expressionless face. And amid the roar of the road, under the trees whose branches made a noise as of furious waves, amid the buzzing of his thoughts, Lupin, all the same, strove to set up a hypothesis. And this hypothesis became gradually more defined, logical, probable, certain, he said to himself, now that he knew the hideous truth about Dolores and saw all the resources and all the odious designs of that crazy mind. Yes, it was she who contrived that most terrible plot against Malreich. What was it she wanted? To marry Pierre Leduc, whom she had bewitched, and to become the sovereign of the little principality from which she had been banished. The object was attainable, within reach of her hand. There was one sole obstacle. I, Lupin, who for weeks and weeks persistently barred her road. I, whom she encountered after every murder. I, whose perspicacity she dreaded. I, who would never lay down my arms before I had discovered the culprit and found the letters stolen from the Emperor. Well, the culprit should be Louis de Malreich, or rather, Léon Massier. Who was this Léon Massier? Did she know him before her marriage? Had she been in love with him? It is probable. But this, no doubt, we shall never know. One thing is certain, that she was struck by the resemblance to Léon Massier in figure and stature which she might attain by dressing up like him, in black clothes, and putting on a fair wig. She must have noticed the eccentric life led by that lonely man, his nocturnal expeditions, his manner of walking in the streets and of throwing any who might follow him off the scent. And it was in consequence of these observations and in anticipation of possible eventualities that she advised Mr. Kesselbach to erase the name of Dolores from the register of births and to replace it by the name of Louis, so that the initials might correspond with those of Léon Massier. The moment arrived at which she must act, and thereupon she concocted her plot and proceeded to put it into execution. Léon lived in the Rue Delaizement. She ordered her accomplices to take up their quarters in the street that backed on to it. And she herself told me the address of Dominique, the head waiter, and put me on the track of the Seven Scoundrels, knowing perfectly well that, once on the track, I was bound to follow it to the end, that is to say, beyond the Seven Scoundrels, till I came up with their leader, the man who watched them and who commanded them, the man in black, Léon Massier, Louis de Malreich. As a matter of fact, I came up with the Seven Scoundrels first. Then what would happen? Either I should be beaten, or we should all destroy one another, as she must have hoped, that night in the Rue des Vignes. In either case, Dolores would have been rid of me. But what really happened was this: I captured the Seven Scoundrels. Dolores fled from the Rue des Vignes. I found her in the Broker's shed. She sent me after Léon Massier, that is to say, Louis de Malreich. I found in his house the Emperor's letters, which she herself had placed there. And I delivered him to justice and I revealed the secret communication, which she herself had caused to be made, between the two coach houses. And I produced all the evidence which she herself had prepared. And I proved, by means of documents which she herself had forged, that Léon Massier had stolen the social status of Léon Massier and that his real name was Louis de Malreich. And Louis de Malreich was sentenced to death. And Dolores de Malreich, victorious at last, safe from all suspicion once the culprit was discovered, released from her infamous and criminal past, her husband dead, her brother dead, her sister dead, her two maids dead, Steinweg dead, delivered by me from her accomplices, whom I handed over to Weber all packed up, delivered, lastly, from herself by me, who was sending the innocent man whom she had substituted for herself to the scaffold, Dolores de Malreich, triumphant, rich with the wealth of her millions and loved by Pierre Leduc, Dolores de Malreich would sit upon the throne of her native Grand Duchy. "Ah!" cried Lupin, beside himself with excitement. "That man shall not die. I swear it as I live, he shall not die." "Look out, governor," said Octave, scared. "We are near the town now, the outskirts, the suburbs." "What shall I care?" "But we shall topple over. And the pavement is greasy. We are skidding." "Never mind." "Take care. Look ahead." "What?" "A tram-car, at the turn." "Let it stop." "Do slow down, governor." "Never." "But we have no room to pass." "We shall get through." "We can't get through." "Yes, we can." "Oh, Lord!" A crash, outcries. The motor had run into the tram-car, cannoned against a fence, torn down 10 yards of planking and, lastly, smashed itself against the corner of a slope. "Driver, are you disengaged?" Lupin, lying flat on the grass of the slope, had hailed a taxi cab. He scrambled to his feet, gave a glance at his shattered car and the people crowding round to Octave's assistance, and jumped into the cab. "Go to the Ministry of the Interior, on the Place Beauvau. 20 francs for yourself." He settled himself in the cab and continued: "No, he shall not die. No, 1,000 times no, I will not have that on my conscience. It is bad enough to have been tricked by a woman and to have fallen into the snare like a schoolboy. That will do. No more blunders for me. I have had that poor wretch arrested. I have had him sentenced to death. I have brought him to the foot of the scaffold. But he shall not mount it. Anything but that. If he mounts the scaffold, there will be nothing left for me but to put a bullet through my head." They were approaching the toll-house. He leant out: "20 francs more, driver, if you don't stop." And he shouted to the officials: "Detective service." They passed through. "But don't slow down, hang it!" roared Lupin. "Faster! Faster still! Are you afraid of running over the old ladies? Never mind about them, I'll pay the damage." In a few minutes, they were at the Ministry of the Interior. Lupin hurried across the courtyard and ran up the main staircase. The waiting room was full of people. He scribbled on a sheet of paper, Prince Sernine, and, hustling a messenger into a corner, said: "You know me, don't you? I'm Lupin. I procured you this berth, a snug retreat for your old age, eh? Only you've got to show me in at once. There, take my name through. That's all I ask of you. The Premier will thank you, you may be sure of that. And so I will. But hurry, you fool, Valenglay is expecting me." 10 seconds later, Valenglay himself put his head through the door of his room and said: "Show the prince in." Lupin rushed into the room, slammed the door and, interrupting the Premier, said: "No set phrases. You can't arrest me. It would mean ruining yourself and compromising the Emperor. No, it's not a question of that. Look here, Malreich is innocent. I have discovered the real criminal. It's Dolores Kesselbach. She is dead. Her body is down there. I have undeniable proofs. There is no doubt possible. It was she." He stopped. Valenglay seemed not to understand. "But look here, Monsieur le Président, we must save Malreich. Only think: a judicial error!
An innocent man guillotined! Give your orders. Say you have fresh information, anything you please, but quick, there is no time to lose." Valenglay looked at him attentively, then went to a table, took up a newspaper and handed it to him, pointing his finger at an article as he did so. Lupin cast his eye at the headline and read: "Execution of the monster. Louis de Malreich underwent the death penalty this morning." He read no more. Thunderstruck, crushed, he fell into the premier's chair with a moan of despair. How long he remained like that he could not say. When he was outside again, he remembered a great silence and then Valenglay bending over him and sprinkling water on his forehead. He remembered, above all, the premier's hushed voice whispering: "Listen, you won't say anything about this, will you? Innocent, perhaps, I don't say not. But what is the use of revelations, of a scandal? A judicial error can have serious consequences. Is it worth while? A rehabilitation? For what purpose? He was not even sentenced under his own name. It is the name of Malreich which is held up to public execration, the name of the real criminal, as it happens. So..." And pushing Lupin gradually toward the door, he said: "So go back there, get rid of the corpse, and let not a trace remain, eh? Not the slightest trace of all this business. I can rely on you, can I not?" And Lupin went back. He went back like a machine, because he had been told to do so and because he had no will left of his own. He waited for hours at the railway station. Mechanically, he ate his dinner, took a ticket and settled down in a compartment. He slept badly. His brain was on fire between nightmares and half-waking intervals in which he tried to make out why Malreich had not defended himself. He was a madman, surely, half a madman. He must have known her formerly. And she poisoned his life. She drove him crazy. So he felt he might as well die. Why defend himself? The explanation only half satisfied him; and he promised himself sooner or later to clear up the riddle and to discover the exact part which Massier had played in Dolores's life. But what did it matter for the moment? One fact alone stood out clearly, which was Massier's madness, and he repeated, persistently: "He was a madman. Massier was undoubtedly mad. Besides, all those Massiers, a family of madmen." He raved, mixing up names in his enfeebled brain. But on alighting at Bruggen station, in the cool, moist air of the morning, his consciousness revived. Things suddenly assumed a different aspect; and he exclaimed: "Well, after all, it was his own lookout. He had only to protest. I accept no responsibility. It was he who committed suicide. He was only a dumb actor in the play. He has gone under. I am sorry, but it can't be helped." The necessity for action stimulated him afresh. Wounded, tortured by that crime of which he knew himself to be the author for all that he might say, he nevertheless looked to the future. "Those are the accidents of war," he said. "Don't let us think about it. Nothing is lost. On the contrary, Dolores was the stumbling block, since Pierre Leduc loved her. Dolores is dead. Therefore Pierre Leduc belongs to me. And he shall marry Geneviève, as I have arranged. And he shall reign. And I shall be the master. And Europe is mine." He worked himself up, reassured, full of sudden confidence, and made feverish gestures as he walked along the road, whirling an imaginary sword, the sword of the leader whose will is law, who commands and triumphs. "Lupin, you shall be king. You shall be king, Arsène Lupin." He inquired in the village of Bruggen and heard that Pierre Leduc had lunched yesterday at the inn. Since then he had not been seen. "Oh?" asked Lupin. "Didn't he sleep here?" "No." "But where did he go after his lunch?" "He took the road to the castle." Lupin walked away in some surprise. After all, he had told the young man to lock the doors and not to return after the servants had gone. He at once received a proof that Pierre had disobeyed him. The park gates were open. He went in, hunted all over the castle, called out. No reply. Suddenly he thought of the chalet. Who could tell? Perhaps Pierre Leduc, worrying about the woman he loved and driven by an intuition, had gone to look for her in that direction. And Dolores's corpse was there. Greatly alarmed, Lupin began to run. At first sight, there seemed to be no one in the chalet. "Pierre! Pierre!" he cried. Hearing no sound, he entered the front passage and the room which he had occupied. He stopped short. rooted to the threshold. Above Dolores's corpse hung Pierre Leduc, with a rope round his neck. Dead. Lupin impatiently pulled himself together from head to foot. He refused to yield to a single gesture of despair. He refused to utter a single violent word. After the cruel blows which fate had dealt him, after Dolores's crimes and death, after Massier's execution, after all those disturbances and catastrophes, he felt the absolute necessity of retaining all his self-command. If not, his brain would undoubtedly give way. "Idiot!" he said, shaking his fist at Pierre Leduc. "You great idiot! Couldn't you wait? In 10 years, we should have had Alsace-Lorraine again." To relieve his mind, he sought for words to say, for attitudes. But his ideas escaped him and his head seemed on the point of bursting. "Oh, no, no," he cried. "None of that, thank you. Lupin mad too? No, old chap. Put a bullet through your head, if you like. And, when all is said, I don't see any other way out. But Lupin drivelling? Wheeled about in a bath chair? No! Style, old fellow. Finish in style." He walked up and down, stamping his feet and lifting his knees very high, as certain actors do when feigning madness, and he said: "Swagger, my lad, swagger. The eyes of the gods are upon you. Lift up your head. Pull in your stomach, hang it. Throw out your chest. Everything is breaking up around you. What do you care? It's the final disaster. I've played my last card, a kingdom in the gutter. I've lost Europe. The whole world ends in smoke. Well, and what of it? Laugh. Laugh. Be Lupin, or you're in the soup. Come, laugh. Louder than that. Louder. Louder. That's right. Lord, how funny it all is. Dolores, old girl, a cigarette." He bent down with a grin, touched the dead woman's face, tottered for a second and fell to the ground unconscious. After lying for an hour, he came to himself and stood up. The fit of madness was over; and, master of himself, with relaxed nerves, serious and silent, he considered the position. He felt that the time had come for the irrevocable decisions that involve a whole existence. His had been utterly shattered, in a few days, under the assault of unforeseen catastrophes, rushing up, one after the other, at the very moment when he thought his triumph assured. What should he do? Begin again? Build up everything again? He had not the courage for it. What then? The whole morning he roamed tragically about the park and gradually realized his position in all its slightest details. Little by little, the thought of death enforced itself upon him with inflexible rigour. But whether he decided to kill himself or to live, there was first of all a series of definite acts which he was obliged to perform; and these acts stood out clearly in his brain, which had suddenly become quite cool. The midday Angelus rang from the church steeple. "To work," he said, firmly. He returned to the chalet in a very calm frame of mind, went to his room, climbed on a stool, and cut the rope by which Pierre Leduc was hanging. "You poor devil," he said. "You were doomed to end like that, with a hempen tie around your neck. Alas, you were not made for greatness. I ought to have foreseen that, and not hooked my fortune to a rhymester." He felt in the young man's clothes and found nothing. But, remembering Dolores's second pocket-book, he took it from the pocket where he had left it. He gave a start of surprise. The pocket-book contained a bundle of letters whose appearance was familiar to him; and he at once recognized the different writings. "The Emperor's letters!" he muttered, slowly. "The old chancellor's letters! The whole bundle which I myself found at Leon Massier's and which I handed to Count von Waldemar! How did it happen? Did she take them in her turn from that blockhead of a Waldemar?" And, suddenly, slapping his forehead: "Why, no, the blockhead is myself! These are the real letters. She kept them to blackmail the Emperor when the time came. And the others, the ones which I handed over, are copies, forged by herself, of course, or by an accomplice, and placed where she knew that I should find them. And I played her game for her, like a mug. By Jove, when women begin to interfere!" There was only a piece of pasteboard left in the pocket-book, a photograph. He looked at it. It was his own. 2 photographs, Massier and I. The 2 she loved best, no doubt. For she loved me. A strange love, built up of admiration for the adventurer that I am, for the man who, by himself, put away the 7 scoundrels whom she had paid to break my head. A strange love. I felt it throbbing in her the other day, when I told her my great dream of omnipotence. Then, really, she had the idea of sacrificing Pierre Leduc and subjecting her dream to mine. If the incident of the mirror had not taken place, she would have been subdued. But she was afraid. I had my hand upon the truth. My death was necessary for her salvation, and she decided upon it." He repeated several times, pensively, "And yet she loved me. Yes, she loved me, as others have loved me, others to whom I have brought ill luck also. Alas, all those who love me die. And this one died too, strangled by my hand. What is the use of living? What is the use of living?" he asked again in a low voice. "Is it not better to join them, all those women who have loved me and who have died of their love? Sonia, Raymonde, Clotilde, Destange, Miss Clarke." He laid the two corpses beside each other, covered them with the same sheet, sat down at a table and wrote: "I have triumphed over everything, and I am beaten. I have reached the goal, and I have fallen. Fate is too strong for me, and she whom I loved is no more. I shall die also." And he signed his name Arsène Lupin. He sealed the letter and slipped it into a bottle which he flung through the window, on the soft ground of a flower border. Next, he made a great pile on the floor with old newspapers, straw and shavings, which he went to fetch in the kitchen. On the top of it he emptied a gallon of petrol. Then he lit a candle and threw it among the shavings. A flame at once arose and other flames leapt forth, quick, glowing, crackling. "Let's clear out," said Lupin. "The chalet is built of wood, and it will all flare up like a match. And by the time they come from the village, break down the gates and run to this end of the park, it will be too late. They will find ashes, the remains of 2 charred corpses, and, close at hand, my farewell letter in a bottle. Good-bye, Lupin. Bury me simply, good people, without superfluous state. A poor man's funeral. No flowers, no wreaths, just a humble cross and a plain epitaph. Here lies Arsène Lupin, adventurer." He made for the park wall, climbed over it and, turning round, saw the flames soaring up to the sky. He wandered back toward Paris on foot, bowed down by destiny, with despair in his heart. And the peasants were amazed at the sight of this traveller who paid with banknotes for his 15-penny meals. 3 footpads attacked him one evening in the forest. He defended himself with his stick and left them lying for dead. He spent a week at an inn. He did not know where to go. What was he to do? What was there for him to do? What was there for him to cling to? He was tired of life. He did not want to live. "Is that you?" Mme. Ernemont stood in her little sitting-room in the villa at Garches, trembling, scared and livid, staring at the apparition that faced her. Lupin! It was Lupin! "You!" she said. "You! But the paper said..." He smiled sadly. "Yes, I am dead." "Well, then," she said, naively. "You mean that, if I am dead, I have no business here? Believe me, I have serious reasons, Victoire." "How you have changed!" she said, in a voice full of pity. "A few little disappointments. However, that's over. Tell me, is Geneviève in?" She flew at him in a sudden rage. "You leave her alone, do you hear? Geneviève? You went to see Geneviève, to take her back? Ah, this time I shall not let her out of my sight. She came back tired, white as a sheet, nervous, and the colour has hardly yet returned to her cheeks. You shall leave her alone. I swear you shall." He pressed his hand hard on the old woman's shoulder. "I will. Do you understand? I will speak to her." "No." "I mean to speak to her." "No." He pushed her about. She drew herself up and, crossing her arms: "You shall pass over my dead body first. Do you hear? The child's happiness lies in this house and nowhere else. With all your ideas of money and rank, you would only make her miserable. Who is this Pierre Leduc of yours? And that Veldenz of yours? Geneviève a grand duchess! You're mad. That's no life for her. You see, after all, you have thought only of yourself in this matter. It was your power, your fortune you wanted. The child you don't care a rap about. Have you so much as asked yourself if she loved your rascally grand duke? Have you asked yourself if she loved anybody? No, you just pursued your object, that is all, at the risk of hurting Geneviève and making her unhappy for the rest of her life. Well, I won't have it. What she wants is a simple, honest existence, led in the broad light of day; and that is what you can't give her. Then what are you here for?" He seemed to waver, but, nevertheless, he murmured in a low voice and very sadly: "It is impossible that I should never see her again. It is impossible that I should not speak to her." "She believes you dead." "That is exactly what I do not want. I want her to know the truth. It is a torture to me to think that she looks upon me as one who is no more. Bring her to me, Victoire." He spoke in a voice so gentle and so distressed that she was utterly moved, and said: "Listen. First of all, I want to know. It depends upon what you intend to say to her. Be frank, my boy. What do you want with Geneviève?" He said, gravely: "I want to say this. Geneviève, I promised your mother to give you wealth, power, a fairy-like existence; and, on the day when I had attained my aim, I would have asked you for a little place, not very far from you. Rich and happy, you would have forgotten, yes, I am sure of it, you would have forgotten who I am, or rather who I was. Unfortunately, fate has been too strong for me. I bring you neither wealth nor power, and it is I, on the contrary, who have need of you. Geneviève, will you help me?" "To do what?" asked the old woman, anxiously. "To live." "Oh," she said, "has it come to that, my poor boy?" "Yes," he answered, simply, without any affectation of sorrow. "Yes, it has come to that. 3 human beings are just dead, killed by me, killed by my hands. The burden of the memory is more than I can bear. I am alone. For the first time in my life, I need help. I have the right to ask that help of Geneviève; and her duty is to give it to me. If not...." "If not?" "Then all is over." The old woman was silent, pale and quivering with emotion. She once more felt all her affection for him whom she had fed at her breast and who still and in spite of all remained her boy. She asked: "What do you intend to do with her?" "We shall go abroad. We will take you with us, if you like to come." "But you forget. You forget." "What?" "Your past." "She will forget it too. She will understand that I am no longer the man I was, that I do not wish to be." "Then, really, what you wish is that she should share your life, the life of Lupin?" "The life of the man that I shall be, of the man who will work so that she may be happy, so that she may marry according to her inclination. We will settle down in some nook or other. We will struggle together, side by side. And you know what I am capable of." She repeated, slowly, with her eyes fixed on his: "Then, really, you wish her to share Lupin's life?" He hesitated a second, hardly a second, and declared plainly: "Yes, yes, I wish it. I have the right." "You wish her to abandon all the children to whom she has devoted herself, all this life of work which she loves and which is essential to her happiness?" "Yes, I wish it. It is her duty." The old woman opened the window and said: "In that case, call her." Geneviève was in the garden, sitting on a bench. 4 little girls were crowding round her. Others were playing and running about. He saw her full face. He saw her grave, smiling eyes. She held a flower in her hand and plucked the petals one by one and gave explanations to the attentive and eager children. Then she asked them questions; and each answer was rewarded with a kiss to the pupil. Lupin looked at her long, with infinite emotion and anguish. A whole leaven of unknown feelings fermented within him. He had a longing to press that pretty girl to his breast, to kiss her and tell her how he respected and loved her. He remembered the mother who died in the little village of Aspremont, who died of grief. "Call her," said Victoire. "Why don't you call her?" He sank into a chair and stammered: I can't. I can't do it. I have not the right. It is impossible. Let her believe me dead. That is better." He wept, his shoulders shaking with sobs, his whole being overwhelmed with despair, swollen with an affection that arose in him, like those backward flowers which die on the very day of their blossoming. The old woman knelt down beside him and, in a trembling voice, asked: "She is your daughter, is she not?" "Yes, she is my daughter." "Oh, my poor boy!" she said, bursting into tears. My poor boy. End of chapter 16. Epilogue of 813. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 813 by Maurice LEBLANC. Epilogue. The Suicide. "To horse!" said the Emperor. He corrected himself on seeing the magnificent ass which they brought him. "To donkey, rather. Waldemar, are you sure this animal is quiet to ride and drive?" "I will answer for him as I would for myself, Sire," declared the count. "In that case, I feel safe," said the Emperor, laughing. And turning to the officers with him, "Gentlemen, to horse!" The market place of the village of Capri was crowded with sightseers, kept back by a line of Italian carabineers, and in the middle, all the donkeys of the place, which had been requisitioned to enable the Emperor to go over that island of wonders. "Waldemar," said the Emperor, taking the head of the cavalcade, "what do we begin with?" "With Tiberius's villa, Sire." They rode under a gateway and then followed a roughly paved path, rising gradually to the eastern promontory of the island. The Emperor laughed and enjoyed himself and good-humoredly chaffed the colossal Count von Waldemar, whose feet touched the ground on either side of the unfortunate donkey borne down under his weight. In 3/4 of an hour they arrived first at Tiberius's Leap, an enormous rock, 1,000 feet high, from which the tyrant caused his victims to be hurled into the sea. The Emperor dismounted, walked up to the handrail, and took a glance at the abyss. Then he went on foot to the ruins of Tiberius's villa, where he strolled about among the crumbling halls and passages. He stopped for a moment. There was a glorious view of the Point of Sorrento and over the whole island of Capri. The glowing blue of the sea outlined the beautiful curve of the bay, and cool perfumes mingled with the scent of the citron trees. "The view is finer still, Sire," said Waldemar, "from the hermit's little chapel at the summit." "Let us go to it." But the hermit himself descended by a steep path. He was an old man, with a hesitating gait and a bent back. He carried the book in which travellers usually write down their impressions. He placed the book on a stone seat. "What am I to write?" asked the Emperor. "Your name, Sire, and the date of your visit, and anything you please." The Emperor took the pen which the hermit handed him and bent down to write. "Take care, Sire, take care!" Shouts of alarm, a great crash from the direction of the chapel. The Emperor turned round. He saw a huge rock come rolling down upon him like a whirlwind. At the same moment, he was seized round the body by the hermit and flung to a distance of 10 yards away. The rock struck against the stone seat where the Emperor had been standing 1/4 of a second before, and smashed the seat into fragments. But for the hermit, the Emperor would have been killed. He gave him his hand and said simply, "Thank you." The officers flocked round him. "It's nothing, gentlemen. We have escaped with a fright, though it was a fine fright, I confess. All the same, but for the intervention of this worthy man." And going up to the hermit, "What is your name, my friend?" The hermit had kept his head concealed in his hood. He pushed it back an inch or so and, in a very low voice, so as to be heard by none but the Emperor, he said, "The name of a man, Sire, who is very pleased that you have shaken him by the hand." The Emperor gave a start and stepped back. Then, at once controlling himself, "Gentlemen," he said to the officers, "I will ask you to go up to the chapel. More rocks can break loose, and it would perhaps be wise to warn the authorities of the island. You will join me later. I want to thank this good man." He walked away, accompanied by the hermit. When they were alone, he said: "You? Why?" "I had to speak to you, Sire. If I had asked for an audience...." "Would you have granted my request? I preferred to act directly and I intended to make myself known while Your Imperial Majesty was signing the book, when that stupid accident..." "Well?" said the Emperor. "The letters which I gave Waldemar to hand to you, Sire, are forgeries." The Emperor made a gesture of keen annoyance. "Forgeries? Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure, Sire." "Yet that Malreich...." "Malreich was not the culprit." "Then who was?" "I must beg Your Imperial Majesty to treat my answer as secret and confidential." "The real culprit was Mrs. Kesselbach." "Kesselbach's own wife?" "Yes, Sire. She is dead now. It was she who made, or caused to be made, the copies which are in your possession. She kept the real letters." "But where are they?" exclaimed the Emperor. "That is the important thing. They must be recovered at all costs. I attach the greatest value to those letters." "Here they are, Sire." The Emperor had a moment of stupefaction. He looked at Lupin, looked at the letters, then at Lupin again and pocketed the bundle without examining it. Clearly, this man was puzzling him once more. Where did this scoundrel spring from, who, possessing so terrible a weapon, handed it over like that, generously, unconditionally? It would have been so easy for him to keep the letters and to make such use of them as he pleased. No, he had given his promise and he was keeping his word. And the Emperor thought of all the astounding things which that man had done. "The papers said that you were dead," he said. "Yes, Sire. In reality, I am dead, and the police of my country, glad to be rid of me, have buried the charred and unrecognizable remains of my body." "Then you are free?" "As I always have been." "And nothing attaches you to anything?" "Nothing, Sire." "In that case...." The Emperor hesitated and then, explicitly: "In that case, enter my service. I offer you the command of my private police. You shall be the absolute master. You shall have full power, even over the other police." "No, Sire." "Why not?" "I am a Frenchman." There was a pause. The Emperor was evidently pleased with the answer. He said: "Still, as you say that no link attaches you...." "That is, one, Sire, which nothing can sever." And he added, laughing: "I am dead as a man, but alive as a Frenchman. I am sure that Your Imperial Majesty will understand." The Emperor took a few steps up and down. Then he said: "I should like to pay my debt, however. I heard that the negotiations for the Grand Duchy of Veldenz were broken off." "Yes, Sire, Pierre Leduc was an impostor. He is dead." "What can I do for you? You have given me back those letters. You have saved my life. What can I do?" "Nothing, Sire." "You insist upon my remaining your debtor?" "Yes, Sire." The Emperor gave a last glance at that strange man who set himself up in his presence as his equal. Then he bowed his head slightly and walked away without another word. "Aha, Majesty, I've caught you this time," said Lupin, following him with his eyes. And, philosophically, "No doubt it's a poor revenge and would rather have recovered Alsace-Lorraine. But still...." He interrupted himself and stamped his foot on the ground. "You confounded Lupin, will you never change? Will you always remain hateful and cynical to the last moment of your existence? Be serious, hang it all! The time has come, now or never, to be serious." He climbed the path that leads to the chapel and stopped at the place where the rock had broken loose. He burst out laughing. It was a good piece of work and His Imperial Majesty's officers did not know what to make of it. But how could they guess that I myself loosened that rock, that at the last moment I gave the decisive blow of the pickaxe and that the aforesaid rock rolled down the path which I had made between it and an emperor whose life I was bent on saving? He sighed. "Lupin, what a complex mind you have! All that trouble because you had sworn that this particular Majesty should shake you by the hand. A lot of good it has done you! An emperor's hand 5 fingers has, no more, as Victor Hugo might have said." He entered the chapel and, with a special key, opened the low door of a little sacristy. On a heap of straw lay a man, with his hands and legs bound and a gag in his mouth. "Well, my friend the hermit," said Lupin, "it wasn't so very long, was it? 24 hours at the most. But I have worked jolly hard on your behalf. Just think, you have saved the Emperor's life. Yes, old chap, you are the man who saved the Emperor's life. I've made your fortune, that's what I've done. They'll build a cathedral for you and put up a statue to you when you're dead and gone. Here, take your things." The hermit, nearly dead with hunger, staggered to his feet. Lupin quickly put on his own clothes and said: "Farewell, O worthy and venerable man. Forgive me for this little upset. And pray for me. I shall need it. Eternity is opening its gate wide to me. Farewell." He stood for a few moments on the threshold of the chapel. It was the solemn moment at which one hesitates, in spite of everything, before the terrible end of all things. But his resolution was irrevocable; and, without further reflection, he darted out, ran down the slope, crossed the level ground of Tiberius's Leap and put one leg over the handrail. "Lupin, I give you 3 minutes for play acting. What's the good, you will say? There is nobody here. Well, and what about you? Can't you act your last farce for yourself?
By Jove, the performance is worth it! Arsène Lupin, heroic comedy in 80 scenes. The curtain rises on the death scene; and the principal part is played by Lupin in person. Bravo, Lupin! Feel my heart, ladies and gentlemen, 70 beats to the minute, and a smile on my lips. Bravo, Lupin! Oh, the rogue, what cheek he has! Well, jump, my lord. Are you ready? It's the last adventure, old fellow. No regrets? Regrets? What for, heavens above? My life was splendid. Oh, Dolores, Dolores, if you had not come into it, abominable monster that you were! And you, Malreich, why did you not speak? And you, Pierre Leduc? Here I am. My 3 dead friends, I'm about to join you. Oh, Geneviève, my dear Geneviève. Here, have you done, you old play-actor? Right you are, right you are. I'm coming. He pulled his other leg over, looked down the abyss at the dark and motionless sea, and, raising his head: "Farewell, immortal and thrice blessed nature. Moriturus te salutat. Farewell, all that is beautiful on earth. Farewell, splendor of things. Farewell, life." He flung kisses to space, to the sky, to the sun. Then, folding his arms, he took the leap. Sidi bel Abbes, the barracks of the Foreign Legion. An adjutant sat smoking and reading his newspaper in a small, low-ceilinged room. Near him, close to the window opening on the yard, 2 great devils of non-commissioned officers were jabbering in guttural French mixed with Teutonic phrases. The door opened. Some one entered. It was a slightly built man, of medium height, smartly dressed. The adjutant rose, glared angrily at the intruder and growled: "I say, what on earth is the orderly up to? And you, sir, what do you want?" "Service." This was said frankly, imperiously. The 2 non-coms burst into a silly laugh. The man looked at them askance. "In other words, you wish to enlist in the Legion?" asked the adjutant. "Yes, but on one condition." "Conditions, by Jove! What conditions?" "That I am not left mouldering here. There is a company leaving for Morocco. I'll join that." One of the non-coms gave a fresh chuckle and was heard to say: "The Moors are in for a bad time. The gentleman's enlisting." "Silence!" cried the man. "I don't stand being laughed at." His voice sounded harsh and masterful. The non-com, a brutal-looking giant, retorted: "Here, recruity, you'd better be careful how you talk to me, or what?" "You'll get something you won't like, that's all." The man went up to him, took him round the waist, swung him over the ledge of the window and pitched him into the yard. Then he said to the other: "Go away." The other went away. The man at once returned to the adjutant and said: "Lieutenant, pray be so good as to tell the major that Don Luis Perenna, a Spanish grandee and a Frenchman at heart, wishes to take service in the Foreign Legion. Go, my friend." The flabbergasted adjutant did not move. "Go, my friend, and go at once. I have no time to waste." The adjutant rose, looked at his astounding visitor with a bewildered eye and went out in the tamest fashion. Then Lupin lit a cigarette and, sitting down in the adjutant's chair, said aloud: "As the sea refused to have anything to say to me, or rather as I, at the last moment, refused to have anything to say to the sea, we'll go and see if the bullets of the Moors are more compassionate. And, in any case, it will be a smarter finish. Face the enemy, Lupin, and all for France." End of Epilogue. End of 813 by Maurice Leblanc.